like to read the, we have to read the intro once again, if you don't mind? Just to make it official. I have March 15th in front of me, so I don't have it today.
I have it. There we go. Continued from January 25th, SEB Herringbrook Meadow LLC requests a modification of comprehensive permit for Herringbrook Meadow LLC pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 40B, Sections 20, 23. The request for change is on file with the ZBA for the project located at 126 and 132 Chief Justice Cushing Highway, Assessors Map 58, Block 1, Parcels 8A and 5, Scituate, Massachusetts.
Thank you. Tonight we're going to hear from our consultant engineer who has reviewed some of the project and stands out with the information. So he's going to have a synopsis of it. We have received quite a few emails and other information during the week that we tried to review as a board, so some of those questions will hopefully get answered later on in the evening too, but after the presentation, the board will ask questions and stuff, and there will be time at the end of the meeting that it will be open up for the audience to ask questions or to get further information from us as well. So if Dan and Scott want to come up and if you guys could just introduce yourself when you get a chance for the record.
So I'm Scott Salbucci, project engineer with Woodard & Curran.
My name is Dan Garson. I'm senior principal at Woodard & Curran.
Thank you.
So, shall we start?
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. So as you know, we were asked to look at the Herringbrook Meadow Development Project, provide an engineering peer review of the plans and other information that the applicant had provided to the board. I'm going to do a general overview of our findings that are in the letter that we submitted on February 27th. And Scott, who is the design engineer to do the review and did the site visits, will highlight some of the key issues related to stormwater and drainage that our letter also addresses. And then we can answer questions after I've gone through and Scott has gone through the presentation. I'd like to just quickly focus on, at a relatively high level, what we looked at, what was our sourcing, and what our findings and recommendations were. Our primary focus, or a key focus, I should say, of the project was really its stormwater management design and the ways and details of its drainage calculations, drainage hydrology, and how they were going to manage drainage on the site, which obviously has a history of stormwater and drainage issues and flooding that have been well documented. The board provided, information to us regarding those conditions. We also looked at the Scituate zoning bylaw, the Scituate stormwater bylaw, and briefly looked at the wetlands protection rules and regulations, primarily, however, to just flag for the board whether the project, recognizing that it is a 40B and a comprehensive permit, but we wanted to flag which, if any, of the board's bylaws, the town's bylaws, the project would be either seeking waivers for or would have design elements that were not consistent with the bylaw. So you would at least have that information. The applicant provided their set of plans, which were dated September 29th, 2017. We looked at their stormwater report dated December 2017, prepared by Scitech engineers. And there were a number of additional supplemental materials from Scitech, a floodplain memo, cut and fill analysis, and various other information that were part of their application that we reviewed. As I said, Scott performed the site visit on February 15th. I believe town officials, some representatives from the town were also present at that site visit. In reviewing the plans, we looked in particular, as I said, at the Massachusetts Stormwater Management Handbook. We felt that was obviously a key set of guidelines, both in terms of the 10 standards that that handbook addresses, which we wanted to look at and see how the project had considered those, what their findings were, and whether they were consistent with the handbook's guidance and recommendations as presented by Mass DEP. And there were a number of comments that we had in our findings, in our recommendations, relative to those stormwater standards. Scott will go into those in more detail there at the end of our letter, and I asked him to kind of go through each of the key standards, particularly those where we found there were either some gaps or deficiencies, or we were recommending that the applicant provide more documentation to confirm some of their design conclusions. I'll highlight just a few of the findings and recommendations, just to give the board a sense of some of those key stormwater issues. Under the stormwater drainage calculations that were provided, the project design includes a closed conduit drainage system with a high-density polyethylene pipe. The stormwater analysis that we reviewed, that we were provided, didn't include the hydraulic analysis for that system. So one of our key recommendations, and Scott will talk about this as well, is we'd recommend to the board that the applicants submit their sizing calculations for that drainage system and the hydraulic analysis that support that design. As I said, that wasn't provided in the material that we were given to review. In our letter, that falls under item number 7, and then there's a follow-on in item number 8 and 9 that address those issues and the recommendation to have the applicant provide that detail. I think others of our key findings really had to do with how the project design would manage both the combination of stormwater and drainage from normal stormwater conditions, or at least the range of stormwater conditions that are typically considered in drainage design, and also to ask for additional documentation relative to more severe storm events, typically 25-year, 50-year, and ultimately even a 100-year storm event, when you would have the combination of stormwater and high groundwater and potentially even surge conditions from storm events.
Such as the one that's going to be over the next 2 days?
Exactly. And those are going to be the critical type of nor'easter storm surge events that at least we didn't see, calculations or elements to support that was considered, so we're recommending that the board ask for that detail. One of the other recommendations which we felt was important, this is under item number 20 in our letter report. The applicant has provided their stormwater management O&M plan and a long-term pollution prevention plan that really focuses on construction activities, construction period activities. We are recommending in particular that the stormwater management plan, the O&M portion of how they're going to maintain and manage and inspect those drainage system elements, that needs to be carried forward as an ongoing long-term O&M plan. After construction, when the project is built, when the residents are there, there needs to be a plan, in our opinion, that the board can review to show what the ongoing O&M to make sure those systems don't get clogged, don't fail over time, et cetera. So we feel that that should be a separate standalone plan, not just part of the construction documents. As I just said, I think just to highlight, there are notes on the plans that refer to some of these O&M conditions, but they're really noted on the construction documents. As I said, we think there should be a separate standalone stormwater management plan and O&M maintenance plan that the board can review and effectively become part of the project's ongoing responsibilities. One of the key things that we wanted to highlight, again, we recognize that the local bylaws don't necessarily apply to a comprehensive 40B project the same as they do to a private development. However, it's important that those elements of the plan that are not consistent with the local bylaws be understood by the board. And has been noted, the project is in a floodplain watershed protection district, which not only will have potential effects during storm events, but the resource issues and the resource areas that are also in those areas need to be considered. The Conservation Commission, I assume, will be reviewing or has reviewed its responsibilities under the State Wetlands Protection Act, but at least the board should be aware and if necessary, consult with the Conservation Commission for their reviews and opinions. One of the things we noted under site design, I'm now touching on the comment we made under item number 36. The applicant's plan indicates that once they receive or approval and go forward, they're going to bring on additional design consultants, engineering consultants to help design some of the structural and mechanical and other floodplain construction elements of the project, which were not part of the current design. We would clearly recommend that those additional consultant details, construction details, be documented and provided to the board, so there is an opportunity to review and make sure that those additional engineering and design elements are consistent and are properly documented. It's our understanding that there are additional or updated plans that the applicant is preparing. We didn't receive those plans, so they're not part of our review, but clearly the new plans that the board would receive would need to just flag and highlight what the changes were from the plans that we saw and whether perhaps some of the things we're commenting on were addressed in the new set of plans. But at this point, we don't know what the new plan details are, but that's something the board should be aware, should be looked at. One of the other comments, this one, I think has not just the concerns related to flooding, but I think it pertains to the public safety issues as well. The plans indicate that during severe storm events, during flooding conditions, the garage is expected to flood. While that, may be acceptable and certainly needs to be addressed in terms of how that surcharging water is managed and how it dissipates, we're recommending that both for public safety as well as for demonstrating that emergency vehicles would have access during a storm event, during potential flooding, we think the applicant should provide the board with an emergency management plan for how the site, the garage, the residences are accessed and emergency vehicles can have access. And in a worst case condition, if there needs to be some emergency response to bring people out of the garage or, to deal with some of the resident safety issues, there needs to be at least a mechanism and a plan for how that would be managed. And obviously that plan needs to be shared with local emergency personnel so they have an idea of what the applicant's going to be doing versus what town officials and town safety emergency personnel are going to be responsible for. As part of that, looking at the garage and the emergency management plan that we're recommending, in the event of flooding in the garage, particularly cars are going to be parked there, there is the potential for hazardous materials, both oil and gas leakage from cars, from the ground, as well as if there's anything stored in the garage. It wasn't clear to us whether the garage may have some other storage capacity. So it needs to be clearly stated in the plans whether in fact there are any potential contaminants in the garage, whether from daily vehicle use or from other sources, and if there are, how those would be managed and protected in the event of a flood event. And another related comment, not specific to the garage, but really to the site, wastewater treatment system. It wasn't clear to us from the documentation how that treatment design would function in a flood surge condition. So we're recommending that there be additional detail provided to demonstrate that the design of that system will in fact function and withstand a potentially severe flooding and surge condition. I think with that, I'll turn it over to Scott. And as I said, the Stormwater Handbook, the DEP Stormwater Management Handbook lists 10 specific standards, which not all 10 apply to the project, but most of them do apply to the project. And we found in a number of cases that the documentation, the plans, the details that we were provided appear not to meet the requirements under the standards. And I'll let Scott go through the details one by one.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. So as Dan mentioned, the 10 standards are set through the Mass DEP Stormwater Handbook. It gives a good synopsis of whether or not this project is meeting the requirements of the DEP for stormwater compliance. So whether it be additional information we requested, or as Dan said, maybe deficiencies within the design that we've noted, we're requesting more documentation from the applicant at this time. So standard 1 goes over no new stormwater discharges untreated to wetlands or waters of the Commonwealth. It didn't appear that was met, although the proposed design does have stormwater treatment devices such as deep sump catch basins, a proprietary stormwater unit that's sized and created specifically to remove and treat stormwater runoff before it discharges into these resource areas, and a riprap outlet pad with a grass conveyance swale. We just want to see, we're asking for more information just to get sizing calculations on their riprap outlet pad to make sure that the stone that they're putting at their outlet does indeed stop the scour and reduce velocity, things of that nature, to make sure that it's meeting the standard of does not cause erosion in the wetlands. So we just want to make sure that that's met. So that's standard 1. Standard 2 is one of the bigger standards to be met when complying with stormwater regulations. So that has to do with peak rate discharges, peak discharge rates, and also within the bylaws of the town, there's peak, there's volume calculations as well to make sure that pre-development conditions are not exceeded by the post-development conditions. So to make sure that when this development is put in place, if and when it's put in place, that it does not create worse problems. It does not worsen problems downstream.
Right.
So,
and just what are some examples of the peak discharge?
So peak discharge. So that's overall flow from the pipe. So whatever runoff may be leaving the site now through natural channels that it all collects to and pools to and leaves at certain points off of the site and runs off into the salt marsh or across adjacent properties. Those volumes of water during a storm event and those rates of flow with cubic feet per second, so that what kind of velocity it's running with, to make sure that when this proposed facility is in place, developments in place, that preconditions are not exceeded with post conditions, so that nothing's getting worse. No, the velocities aren't getting higher, the volumes aren't getting higher, and downstream impacts aren't getting worse by any means.
And really, the concern there for the abutting properties would be that while they probably have their own flooding issues during severe events, as Scott said, the project with its additional impervious area, with its additional drainage, design features shouldn't make abutting and downstream flooding greater than would occur prior to the project.
Yeah.
And there's just not enough detail to demonstrate that was achieved.
Right, and the applicant notes that based on the fact that this is a land subject to coastal storm flowage, this standard could be waived, but at the same time, that may be to within the salt marsh, but the flows and the discharges that go across adjacent properties, those types of things, we still need to make sure before they reach those areas where, the tides and the floodwaters come, we need to make sure that flows across properties are not made any, more impactful, made faster or more voluminous. So those are the things that we're looking for. We're looking for a little more detail and more documentation from the applicant on, have they acknowledged and looked into our conditions getting worse in post-construction conditions. So.
If I could just ask a question on that.
Yep.
So, because I had kind of focused in on the waiver too. So the waiver would make sense if you were not affecting neighboring properties. Is that?
Yeah,
what I'm
if you
hearing
weren't
say?
going to be discharging across someone else's property, it wouldn't be a concern really. It would be you're leaving the site, but it's also somewhere that there's going to be floodwaters, there's going to be coastal waters coming up, tides coming up. So it's not, the peak rate and the peak volume aren't as stringent, and they're not seen to be regulated when it's in that area. But when you're also getting to that point and you're discharging across someone's property, that's when we need to make sure that you're not just going directly into that marsh. You're cutting across someone's property before you get to that marsh. So we need to make sure that you're not making things worse across that property.
So would this particular standard apply at all to the area, I think it's the isolated land subject to flooding, the relocation of that? Or is this just wastewater discharge?
Stormwater discharge.
Stormwater.
So, and could you define stormwater discharge for me?
Stormwater is going to be rainwater, snow melt, things like that. So it's really rain events that's coming down. So it's the water that's captured within the drainage system and discharged out, or captured within graded land that's made to direct the flow and convey the flow to a certain spot. So it's those types of flows from rain events.
So this would apply directly to the properties on Martha's Lane directly south of the project? This particular standard, is that what I'm understanding then?
That would be if the flows were directed that direction. The flows are going north towards the salt marsh. So the way the flows are going and the discharge points that we're analyzing in pre-conditions and post-conditions, those discharge points that we're analyzing are, on the other side of their property, on the salt marsh side of the property. That's where the flow is directed to now in existing conditions, and that's where it's going to be going in proposed conditions. So the properties on Martha's Lane are more impacted by flood events rather than what's going to be happening from this development. The properties to the north that are still on Chief Justice Cushing Highway, as there's a couple design points that flow across adjoining properties on that roadway that we still need to see some data on to make sure that they are meeting this standard. And so just to speak, as Dan mentioned with the hydraulic analysis, we're looking for a little more information on the actual closed conduit system, the piping system. We have calculations from the applicant on the overall property and how they break that large watershed. The property itself is considered the watershed. They'll break it up into sub-watersheds of, okay, maybe the contours, the grading, the way the land flows takes runoff into this area, and this area. So there's maybe 3 different points that runoff goes to now. And in proposed conditions, that's where they'll put runoff to those 3 points as well. So we just want to make sure that the pipes that are taking it there now, which aren't currently existing, the proposed pipes are actually sized to be able to convey those flows and make sure that they aren't surcharged, they aren't overwhelmed during larger storm events to the point where flow from what they call one sub-watershed going to one design point doesn't overflow, go into another sub-watershed and increase that design point, where the model doesn't really show that right now. We want to make sure that they have accounted for that, and they are, you know, properly designing their drainage system to make sure that, you know, flows aren't diverted from one area out into another area, which in a sense that could also happen with some of the grading that they have proposed, where that could be directed towards the Martha Lane area, some of the backyards coming down that embankment that they're proposing. So we just want to make sure we're looking for more information on that. Going in within the same thread of that is they have an interceptor channel, which is a graded grassed area that's depressed to divert flows and channelize flows into their system. We just want to be able to see that they've designed that grassed berm and channel, that it actually captures these storm events and funnels the flow in the direction that they claim it does. We just need the documentation that shows that they did design it and funnels the flow in the place that it's claimed to be conveyed, and it doesn't leave that sub-watershed and that design point and go into another area and potentially, you know, divert into abutting properties. So we're looking for more documentation on that as well. So. Standard 3 is for recharge, and feel free to stop me if you guys know about these standards more or less, or ask for more as you have. But recharge is the thought of, okay, right now it's wooded, it's meadow, it's depending on what type of land cover is there and what type of soils are under the ground. There's a certain calculation to figure out how much water seeps into the ground and recharges the groundwater now. And then in proposed conditions, the designer needs to make sure that a minimum of that same amount, that same volume of water is reaching the groundwater once they put all their impervious parking lots and buildings on the site. So to make sure that they are recharging the water and not starving in a certain aquifer, or groundwater subsurface flows may go to wetlands or creeks, things like that. Making sure that they are recharging that water. We don't have calculations to document that they are meeting the groundwater recharge requirements, so we've requested that as well for standard number 3.
Can I ask you, what's the effect of, if they're bringing in so much fill, it's not the natural soil with all the, biological whatever that's been growing up, plant material that's been laid down for maybe, at least hundreds or millions of years. What's the, is there a way to calculate what the change in the actual soil from your natural soil to fill it is going to be?
I don't believe I would be able to speak to something like that.
Who would?
Well,
there's a lot of fill going in here.
Right, but
presumably it's going to be what's considered clean fill. It's not going to be, filled with contaminants. It's not going to have, chunks of asphalt, things that really aren't allowed.
Yeah.
So I think the applicant, in good faith, would be looking to properly bring in fill that they would buy from a reputable supplier.
Sure.
But the nature of the historic soils, the present soils, and the fill material, as long as it's clean fill, it meets, the need for whatever purpose it is, whether it's just going to be ground cover or whether it's going to be material that they're going to build something on top of. And if that's the case, it has to be a certain type of fill and it has to meet certain compaction requirements. So it's not so much an issue of the new soil type versus the old soil type. It's really what that proposed new soil is going to be used for. And if it's simply going to be changing the elevation and providing ground cover, I think the presumption is that it'll be suitable for that use. But again, there needs to be at least a demonstration by the applicant that they are considering the proper type of fill. It is being used in whatever fashion they're proposing, and at least, you know, offer the board a clear statement of how they determined the type and volume and use of that fill material.
Right, yeah, the material that they'll be building on certainly has to be different than
Right.
it's something that will be able to support a structure in parking lots and things like that. So that material, that topsoil that I think you may have been talking about, you know, the hundreds of year old soil that's really maybe rich in nutrients and things like that, that will be, you know, removed so that it can be properly built upon, and then the fill will come in. So the land use will clearly change from meadow to buildings in impervious areas, but at the same time, pieces of these regulations and these requirements are to make sure that
It's replicated in a different form.
it's replicated in different ways. So to make sure that that recharge, like at least this standard here, the groundwater is not just sent somewhere else. It's still going to where it used to be going, so that we keep the existing conditions as much as possible, or we replicate the existing conditions as much as possible. So.
To the extent they improve any recharge characteristics, that comes off of their, presumably, their obligations to mitigate other stormwater.
Yeah.
Am I correct?
Right, so there's calculations within these regulations that they need to meet certain requirements, and we're just asking for the documentation to make sure that we can check that they have met those, yeah. So that speaks to standard 3. Standard 4 has to do with water quality volume, which is making sure that the stormwater runoff that leaves the site is clean, in a sense, so that you're removing any what they call total suspended solids, which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's the sediments that are moved and migrating downstream within the stormwater flows, so that they don't just sanding operations in the wintertime don't flush sand right through their drainage system, right through their piping, and right into the salt marsh. So that's what this standard's about, is treating this water quality.
And capturing any of the, basically the small debris that might come through, whether it's sand or from the roof, or wherever it comes from.
Yeah, from the
They wanna
parking
capture
lots
it.
and things like that, and so it's mostly, it's from the parking lots, it's what's washing off of cars as they drip down, as they sit in parking lots. The roofs don't have as much of contamination coming off them because no one's really up there. That's more of an impervious cover piece, speaking back towards standards 2 and 3. Standard 4, we just need to see some better calculations of, we're requesting refined total suspended solid and water quality treatment calculations. The standards and the Mass Handbook ask for outside testing for these proprietary units that they have suggested, and rather than going solely by the manufacturer's testing, where the manufacturer typically boosts gives themselves favorable removal rates for what they have to meet. So usually we ask for outside testing for those removal rates to justify what this treatment unit can actually do. So we're asking for those numbers in this standard. Standard 5 is not applicable to this site. This is not what's considered a land use with higher potential pollutant load as defined by Mass DEP. Standard 6, this is applicable. This is stormwater discharges within a zone 2 of a public water supply. So that has a little bit more stringent standards according to their handbook. And we're just looking for a little bit more documentation about, exactly the removal rates, speaking back to standard 4 of what their stormwater best management practices actually provide. So we're looking for a little bit more documentation from the applicant's engineer, and also just documentation that during flood events and during flood events that may submerge the stormwater system or back water through the pipes, so that instead of water flowing through the pipes during a rain event and going out to the salt marsh, when the salt marsh is underwater, the absolute opposite coming up, water coming back through the pipes and surcharging back through the system, to make sure that the units that they have proposed won't, in some fashion be submerged, be backwatered, and then when the floodwaters recede, all the pollutants that they've captured over the time are flushed downstream. So to make sure that, that's not happening. So we're asking for more documentation on that. Standard 7 is not applicable to this project. That's for redevelopment. Standards 8 and 9, they kind of go hand in hand in a sense. One being kind of what's their plan for erosion sediment controls during construction, and what's their plan for ongoing long-term maintenance. And Dan touched upon that we'd like to see 2 separate documents rather than one small document that they put together. One that will be used during construction that the contractor can have, the contractor can follow, that there's better notes meeting all the things that are asked for within the stormwater handbook, so that they meet that separate document, that first document for standard 8 for construction period erosion sediment controls, and then standard 9 for when the contractor leaves and the developer leaves, and now it's the homeowners, who's responsible for the ongoing maintenance, what is the maintenance, and having that as a standalone document that whoever is managing this property has at all times, and what they can do in the events of emergencies, what they can do when they find hazardous materials that have accumulated within their stormwater system, things like that. So oils and grease as hazardous materials, but just looking for 2 standalone documents that have a little bit more detail of what's asked for within the stormwater handbook. In standard 10, they did meet that. They submitted an illicit discharge statement, just basically saying that we to the best of our knowledge, acknowledge that there's no illicit discharges coming into this proposed system. So with that, due to the supplemental data that we're requesting, we'll be looking for that to be able to make our final determination on whether this does meet the standards or not. So that would be the synopsis of the 10 standards.
So if I get it right, out of 10, 8 are applicable, 1 was met, and 7 were not met.
Yes, 8 are applicable. 1 was met and 7 were not met. Yeah, and
It's not that they weren't
it's not that they weren't
met.
met.
You
it's
don't
just
have
that
enough
Didn't
information.
provide the data to confirm.
Yeah, it's that we're looking for.
You
more-
don't
It's
have
not
en-
met
you don't have
if it's
enough-
not- if they can't prove that it's been met. They gotta show it still. I mean,
I'm
I'm reading from their thing.
I'm not
Has
sure
not
I'd
been met.
agree with the way you're saying
Well, that's
that.
what they said. They said has not been met. And so-
When
With the
a
information
trial's
that they
half finished, a person's not guilty or innocent because they haven't completed the
Well, I
trial.
don't find it
And
guilty
for
or
much of
innocent
the,
either.
for much of the
This is-
design, and
Yeah.
for the details that Scott just enumerated, proper engineering practice would suggest that their engineers did those studies, have that information, or will develop it very quickly, and it's just a matter of providing it to the board, and if we review it, to a peer review to confirm that it was done according to the requirements of the DEP.
So as I say, it's kind of incomplete. You just need
That's
to
all right.
gather the rest of the data to make the final
Right. Incomplete would
determination.
be a better way to characterize it, I think.
And-
Yes.
As to the level of incompleteness, and this is the first time I've gone through this process, especially on this scale, some of the stuff that you guys said you didn't have yet sounds like, oh, this is stuff you want. It sounds like a good reason you want it, and they're going to provide it. Some of it, it sounds sort of surprising that we got to this point and you don't have it. It sounds like you're saying you don't have that much information or any information at all on the gallons per minute or capacity of any of their stormwater drainage systems? Or do you just not have enough detail? Are you questioning some of their calculations?
I think it's
I was a
level
little
of
unclear
detail.
on
I think
that.
it's a level of detail. So as I was mentioning, there's kind of there's a high level review with the model of you take the watershed of
Right.
every drop of rain that hits this property, and where does it go, and how does it funnel down, and where does it finally discharge? And for this site, they found 3 discharge points.
Okay.
That we walked the site and we confirmed with them. So in existing conditions and proposed conditions, we look at those 3 discharge points, and we want to make sure that those peak rates and those volumes are not exceeded in the post-construction conditions for the pre-construction conditions. So we have that information, but the information for the closed conduit system in the proposed conditions, where those pipes, those catch basins, those pipes that funnel everything through the site and off the parking lot and discharge it out behind the building, to make sure that those pipes are sized adequately and that during flood events,
So-
these flows aren't surcharging and moving into different watershed buckets.
I understand you there, but when you say, do you not have any information yet on how big the pipes are, or?
They provided the sizes.
Okay.
They stated their sizes. We
And-
just don't have the data of what percent full are those. Are those over 100% and they're surcharged? Are they 50% and everything's fine? We just don't have that to say, we can check that off and say.
You're kind of
we have this
verifying.
The
information.
backup
You wanna
counts
verify the
demonstrate
information.
how they reach the pipe size.
So some of it is, they've given you mathematical conclusions. You might agree with those conclusions, but you want to see their work. I'm
That would be
oversimplifying
a
on
simple-
purpose.
Yeah, that would be a way to describe it.
Okay, that seems to make a little more sense. That's what I wanted to understand from your earlier presentation. Because I was hearing that you don't have a lot, and I wanted to understand how we got there. And some of it, for instance, to go back to, you mentioned that you need plans on two sides of the garage being open. I think I have a plan on two sides of the garage being open, and I just want to understand, am I looking at the wrong plan? Do you guys not have a plan that I have? I just want to understand how we got to that point. I don't necessarily need an answer on that one thing. I just want to make sure that that's not indicative of something that's happening over and over again with things you think you're missing or that you are missing.
And this isn't, these are typical things that come up in a peer review. This is
Sure.
not, there's nothing that's maybe, like you're saying, that, oh my gosh, I can't believe we reviewed a plan set that was so incomplete. These are typical comments
Okay.
throughout a typical peer review that, although this isn't maybe as typical of a project, but the majority of these comments, these are things that, we're just asking for the backup on, we're just asking for a little more clarification on. And sometimes, sometimes there are comments that we put in that the applicant will reply to us and say, it's stated here. And there may be things that, oh, we didn't see that, thank you for bringing
Right.
that to our attention and notifying us in that manner, so. Or maybe, okay, we didn't pick up on that, can you add some notes on that so that the contractor doesn't miss it, or so that other, agencies don't miss it, so there's things like that, so.
But getting the explanation and working that out, that you have some conclusions and you want to see some more of how those conclusions were arrived at.
Yeah, before.
That makes a
yeah,
lot more sense.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if the applicant would argue that any of these recommendations don't apply to them.
Can I speak to the whole thing as an overview?
Let me just state your name.
Bob Engler, SEB, Senior Project, old guy. From our point of view, and we
I'm sorry, and
work,
you're from SciTech?
no, SEB, the developer.
Oh, the developer, I'm sorry.
I'm Jeff's father, maybe that makes more sense.
Okay.
We've worked with these guys before, Winchester, we worked it out, we're confident we can work it out again. Typically, the way this would work, and it still can work, is we would sit down with them and SciTech and go through all this face-to-face and come back to you having worked out a lot of these things, which we only got 2 days ago, so we didn't have a chance, and we don't have a chance tonight to respond, because we'd like to have a meeting. Whether you choose to attend, you can, but we'd like to sit with them and kind of go over all this stuff, come back to you with something. That's one point, and I'm confident we can do it. Point number two, and this is a 40B point, when they ask for a lot of this stuff, on the 40B, and it's very clear that the purpose of that is to do schematic work and preliminary engineering, get a permit, and then do all the finished work before you can pull a building permit, gets reviewed again, and if you don't meet it, you gotta meet it or you don't get through it. So this is stuff by and large that would normally come after the permit, because it's all details. And just to make that point again, the previous project was permitted without any of this stuff, okay? It has a permit without the level of details they're talking about, because SciTech did the plans the same way they've done them now. At a preliminary level, it was permitted, and then when whoever would have done it, and may still do it. If you go back to the old plan, they'd have to go and do all this work to get a final building permit. We're not saying we won't do it, we're saying we'll sit down with them, and if we know we're gonna get permitted, and we can't say that, but if we think we're gonna get permitted, we're willing to do the work to give them the information that they need, so you're comfortable with the final stuff. Maybe there's a couple of points where we're gonna say, that's really a detail that we can provide when we get to the next level. But I don't know what that is yet, because we haven't sat down yet. But I'm confident we can work this out. It's just that we've just seen it. They're looking for a lot of stuff. We normally wouldn't do it at this stage, but we probably will. So, excuse me, by the next meeting, we should have a lot more clarity than we have right now.
And I think what's trying to be said here that is very important for the audience and for the viewing audience is this is, I'm going to pick on item number 37, because it's short, it's easy.
I like that.
It says, in the provided building code explanation document, the applicant notes that the lower level below the building and below the flood elevation is allowed to be used for parking if two sides of the level are open and are built above adjacent land on those two sides. That's the plans that's before us, that's what we've been talking about. We've actually had some conversation about that. And the recommendation from Woodward and Curran is the applicant should show and document the location of two sides of the garage level that meet these requirements. The plans do not show what two sides are open and are built above the adjacent land and allow flood waters to move through the garage. That's a very simple and reasonable thing to do, and I think that's what everyone's kind of saying. It says it's an initial review, it's just come out. The applicant, I'm sure, is willing, as you've stated, is willing to work with Woodward and Curran to try to address some of these concerns. It isn't like we've just listed, 50 things that the applicant has failed to do.
Right,
It's process.
I would just add to what Mr. Engler said. It is oftentimes done the way he said, that the peer review consultant, in this case ourselves, would sit down with the applicant's engineer and the applicant and members of the board if they attend the meeting as well, and go through these in detail from an engineering detail perspective. And typically with the two engineering firms having clear understanding of engineering principles, reach agreement on, if not all, many of them, and the ones that there is an agreement, that would be noted by the applicant and by your peer reviewer. So it is a common practice to have that combined discussion, review with the two engineering firms and the applicant and the board.
And the board at some point needs a starting point, so we need something to reference to, whether it's going to be met now or in the future, but if we don't have that information, we can't reference it in moving forward, so.
And our purpose here, as I said in the introduction, was really to flag from our perspective and our experience all the issues that we felt were important for the board to recognize and for the applicant to recognize, and for those that they can submit a response that meets that requirement, that can be checked off, and for those that they have further analysis that they'll be doing at a later date, they can identify that, and the board would be aware that it would be coming in a future submission.
And I'd submit that I think that them getting together solves a lot of problems. I think we should encourage that. I don't think they should remain in silos. I think they should meet or do whatever they have to do to exchange information. They've already had a site visit together, which was, I think was productive. Preliminary plan standard versus final plan standard, I think that there's a lot of different opinions on that. Hopefully we won't have to get into that too much. I generally view it as if it's something that's affecting public health and safety or kind of go, no-go basic feasibility issues, we should hear it now. If there's some fine details that we can clear up through some conditions in a permit, which we do pretty typically, then I'm sure we'll be able to kind of find the dividing line there. They're referencing a few issues here that I think we need to clear up as to basic functionality of the project, and I think those things are things we care about now. Final engineering, tiny details we'll handle at through conditions in the permit, where Woodward and Curran and SciTech will be back again to go over really fine details. But right now, I think it's kind of premature to, as you mentioned, John, to kind of get into that. But definitely, I wouldn't expect SciTech to be able to respond to all this, and they should respond point by point to, and Woodard and Curran should before the next time. Issue resolved, still ongoing, whatever it is. They're all numbered for that reason, so we can kind of draw that down, yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
For the record, Jeff Angler, the less handsome of the two anglers.
right answer.
Less ball.
I agree with what Jay's saying, and I think this process so far has been collaborative and I think productive. And I am representing to the board that we're going to do everything we can. We've worked with Woodard and Curran. You know, they were tough on us in Winchester, but ultimately it resulted in a better project, and I would expect nothing different here. Because I think they would recommend, even on their own suggestions, a few of the items are actually more effective doing as a condition of the building permit, because we will have had the benefit of all the engineering. Sometimes like an O&M plan is better designed once everything is designed, as opposed to doing it now, and then we do all the working drawings, and there's different details, and you have to go back. So all of that, all of those, and is customary on a comprehensive permit, they would have another bite at the apple. So if it's a, you know, condition of a building permit, we then do our working drawings, we submit the O&M plan, and then they can review it and say, yes, this meets our expectations, or you're missing this, that, and the other. And the town has the power of the building permit issuance and the conditions in the permit to make sure we're providing the necessary level of detail. But in some instances of some of the things that they've recommended, quite frankly, we're not trying to, you know, skirt our responsibility, but on a few of the items, it just makes sense to do it a little bit later, and we would expect to be held to that standard. A lot of what they've mentioned is just that. I mean, you raise a good point when you look at it. Geez, they didn't, you know, they only met one of the 8 conditions. I mean, what are these guys doing? On any project we're on, the instruction to the civil engineer is design this, because you know what standards we're going to be held to, so design it to these standards. Now, sometimes some of those details aren't necessarily included, but a good engineer knows it'll work. You know, they'll say, all right, well, when we go back, we know when we provide the detail, it'll work. And I would expect nothing less out of SciTech in this case. So it's a long-winded way of saying I've represented other clients that are like, the plans are compliant with 40B, the schematic level, it's all we need to do. I'm telling you, we're not taking that position. We look forward to meeting with Woodard and Curran. It's going to be, it saves 100 emails of back and forth as opposed to sitting across the table. Can you explain this? Did you miss this? I didn't. A lot comes out of it. Then we have our marching orders. I mean, I haven't even talked to my own team yet, because I was busy. They were busy Monday. I was busy yesterday. So we haven't really even had a chance to digest the comments we've received. So hopefully, you know, after this, we can set up a meeting, hopefully next week. We'll certainly let the town know if the town wants to, you know, send a representative. You can't send multiple people from the board, because, you know, that would violate the council well knows. But we'll do it how you want, but, you know, we'll set it up probably, I don't know if it's we're in current office site, it doesn't matter to us, but I think it'll be a very productive process. We'll then have our marching orders, and we'll start to, you know, endeavor to chip away at the lengthy list that they've identified.
I just in general am still really concerned about the flooding and the way the floodwaters are gonna just get discharged onto, you know, the way they're gonna come up into the property and the way they're gonna get discharged off onto other people's property. Scott?
Yes.
You had said you said you were there on February 15th. I assume that was a nice sunny day, right? Or at least overcast, but it wasn't
yeah, I know what you
stormy.
mean.
It was
So,
calm.
you know, all over the news, it's, you know, for the next 2 days, there are gonna be historic flooding. I'm wondering if it makes sense if you could come back to the site during high tide, either tomorrow afternoon, I'm not gonna expect midnight on Friday, but, or Saturday at noon. And, one or both of those days to be able to, you know, see what the flooding is. I mean, we have lots of pictures, and we have, just football fields of water everywhere. But to be able to really see it, I think it might be really useful, and I'm wondering if the applicant would be amenable to allow people on the property to do that, and if whether or not it makes any sense for you to do that.
Well, we can discuss it a little further tomorrow morning internally, but I think, there's been, like you said, a lot of pictures sent. So I think just in the grand scheme of things, I think we understand that the water does come very high within the property. It rises to elevation 16, I believe it is, on the FEMA flood maps. So maybe seeing where that comes up tomorrow could be beneficial. It's tough to say exactly what maybe what the storm event may be. They're calling for about maybe 2 inches of rain, whereas 100 years.
2 to 4.
2 to 4.
Yeah.
Whereas 100-year storm event is about 7 inches of rain.
Yeah.
So
I think that the assumptions that they're working off of between the floodplain and the 100-year storm are twice, like you're saying, the worst case scenario forecast for tomorrow. So while sure you should see the site when it's dry and see it when it's wet, I think that the assumptions that they're working on, the requirements that they're placing, are actually far worse than anything
it won't change
we've ever seen.
It won't change the data points that we're using to analyze, how high does this water come up, whether I see it, with my eyes, or whether I see it through those pictures, or whether I see it just as the FEMA flood line within the property.
Well, I
That
don't
data
think the
point that we're
picture-
using.
To tell you the truth, I don't think sometimes the pictures that are helpful, because you're not standing where the picture's being taken. You don't know exactly. I mean, to see that there's flooding over here, we gotta see where it's right where this is wanting to be built. I mean, all I can say is they're saying historic, and it's happened so fast. You hear people down on Front Street not able to get out of their business because the flooding happened so quickly. Marcia Klein testified at the last meeting that the flood waters came up so fast she could barely get out of her house. And we've got a situation where we've got, 75 cars parked underneath? And if you have a storm come in the middle of the night, I think there needs to be an understanding on how quickly this can happen, and what's an appropriate response, both in design, if there is an appropriate response in design, or if it's just doomed, because it's just in the floodplain.
Well, I think what he's also saying is that, physically being at the site will not give him more information that he doesn't already have. So although there's a visuals there for his calculations and the figuring you have to do, that's fine. It's one thing to visually see it for, if we know where the flooding is, how much, how we're gonna get the cars out and that type of thing as part of the management. But that's different from his calculations, that he can't take the data from looking at the storm and put it into calculations to work. He has to take the data from maps, 100-year storms, and other flow information that he already has at his disposal. You're not making it up because of what you see. You're making it up because of what you have historically and the flows and calculations and stuff. So
Right.
that's
Well, I mean, whether I'm out there and I stand 20 feet into the site and I say, oh my, here comes the water, it's hitting my boots.
Oh, my
Oh,
God.
how, and I guess that spot where it hits my boots, that's where, when I go and look at the plans, I'm not gonna think to myself, okay, I was standing right there. I'm gonna say, well, where is the data point that I'm gonna be able to review these plans to, that the regulations say I need to review these plans to, not the data point was where my boots were. It's the data point is where the FEMA flood maps say this water will come to. So that's the point that I'm using.
It's kind of math versus humanities.
Yeah, unless there was repeated anecdotal evidence that the new FEMA flood map was wrong and it's not 16, it's 18.
Yeah.
I'm not, I kind of, not to pile on, Sarah, but I think relying on that data, I think we know, and I think the applicant has already readily conceded, their bottom of their garage is 12, and everyone's assuming that there's gonna be some flood events, and then they're evaluating impacts with respect to materials and gasolines and oils and everything else like that, and we know that it's gonna lap up, right behind the project, it's gonna be at like 7 feet or whatever. We know that's gonna be full of water. And tomorrow, it'll probably be at that level. It probably won't get to 12, but it may. So we know, and they have to assume, and everyone's going on the assumption, even though it won't happen all that often, that garage is gonna fill with water. That whole field is gonna be wet as can be tomorrow. Assessing post, what it's gonna be like in a post condition, I think that's why they have to rely on the data.
And so we can understand, and really a question is, your analysis is going to include what happens in a storm like tomorrow and in a storm like 100-year storm when the water comes in and recedes at the site as it is now, and it's going to analyze what happens in those two types of storm scenarios in the site as it is proposed, and then you're gonna tell us what we're looking at in those two scenarios. Is that
That's the
correct?
data we're asking the applicant to provide us.
Well,
that we can
meaning
get.
once you have all the information,
Exactly.
your
We can-
conclusion
Right.
is
We'll
going to
review-
give us that information as best you can, which is why the town has chosen you to do that. Yeah.
So those are, we've referenced within the letter several points to, ask for more documentation about those features when things happen, during a flood event within the garage, because it will ultimately flood. It is below the floodplain, the 100-year storm floodplain. So what is the, as Dan mentioned, the emergency plan for those things, and what's gonna happen with, what may be within that within that garage, and has the O&M plan stated specifically what's not allowed in that garage, and what to do in the event of these occurrences, things like that, so.
'Cause I'm sorry, I think that's one of the big questions is I wanna know, but the ocean wants to come in, the ocean's gonna come in whether this thing is there or not, but what sticks out for me is the ocean comes in now on an empty site and leaves. When they put this structure, however it ends up there, when the ocean comes in, is it gonna leave through his yard? I wanna know that, and I'm sure that's what these folks are coming and sitting through these meetings for. One of the things they wanna know, and that's what I look forward to hearing from you guys, recognizing you don't have what you need to tell us that
Yeah,
yet.
and in
I don't mean to
addition,
imply
there's-
that.
There's other related issues too.
Well,
I think that,
of
like,
course.
we got this letter from
North and
the
south.
North and South River Watershed Association, and they're concerned about some of the same pollutants going back towards the river that they choose to protect, so those kinds of issues, I think.
I didn't mean to imply that was my only concern,
Right,
just
right.
one that stood out in this conversation.
No, but this might be a time too to address, when, kind of prioritize what information we might need
Sure.
early on in the project as to, is there, the water flows onto the neighbors rather than being answered at the end of the project or final design. We might want that, sooner rather than later. And-
Sure.
And those type of things, flow, especially, again, once, that's a thing that gets designed after the fact, the ship has already sailed, and they, we can condition it, but if we don't have the information, it's, up front, it's not gonna, make for good. Right.
I think that information, I think it's important. I mean, Woodard and Curran is the town peer reviewer, and they're not the peer reviewer of just the zoning board. I mean, they're the peer reviewer of the neighbors, and the abutters in this room. And they're looking out for their interest as well, as the members said. So the information you're looking for, that's very important to us too. So that's different than an O&M plan that might be
Right.
better served later. Relative to the flooding, I mean, I would agree with Woodard and Curran, and what I like about civil engineering is it's based on data and math. Photographs to me, and they're subjective, anecdotal, we've gotten a lot of photographs, but you know what? A lot of those are at elevations very different than our site. I mean, the storm back in January or whatever that everybody said was historic and humongous. Route 3A by our site at the low point, the one where Road Marina, was really flooded, 3A never closed, never. We talked to the police about that. And that's
3A is elevated there.
Yeah, but let me finish my point.
Just a minute, no, we don't want to start
Three-
speaking out of turn, but.
Right, and
everyone
that's
has
at
a chance.
elevation 15, okay? And that never flooded, and it wasn't really close either. Our first residential level, and I know you're not talking, is way higher than that, and even our garage is at 12. So we're not talking about, I mean, it would have to be Noah's Ark, you know, for the whole garage to be underwater. Will it flood with the huge event? Yes, and we've never represented anything otherwise. It is in the floodplain, and it can flood, and we're gonna work with Woodard and Curran to show them how that would work, but I would agree with Woodard and Curran. Our position is the FEMA lines are very, very conservative relative to where the true flooding is, but we have to live with that. That's non-negotiable, and we've designed to that. So we will continue. It's been the single biggest issue and point that we've designed this entire building around is the floodplain, and it remains our biggest issue because we know it's, if not your biggest issue, it's in the top two, and we know it's important to the neighbors, and we look forward to having that discussion continue.
Would you mind if I came onto your property tomorrow to take a look?
We technically don't own it. I will say I don't mind, and unless you hear otherwise, consider yourself invited, but we'll just clear it with the owner, so.
We will get to
Also
the
be
audience, but we
careful,
might
I
have
think
some-
it's gonna get a little hairy tomorrow.
I think it washed
I'm not
away.
going that far in, trust me.
Jay, did you
Swept
have
away.
anything that you wanted to
On
ask
Woodard
Woodard
and
to comment?
Yeah, I think because I don't want to spend too much time, because I know that you're going to get together with the SciTech guys. In addition to the stormwater stuff, there's a lot of other comments on other kind of tangential issues that you guys raise. And I'm assuming SciTech's going to go through the entire memo, not just the 10 standards, not just some of the other big ticket items that Dan said, and we're going to see a response. It doesn't make any sense for us to dive into them, let SciTech dive into them and have that conversation. There was a few things on, for example, standards under the wetland bylaws for that kind of thing. There was a question as to what happened after the court judgment that the town did prevail in with respect to the wetlands. I don't think we have to belabor those points here. I think it's in the memo. I think that SciTech and the applicant team should have those discussions, and we'll be happy to check in where we have to on points of disagreement, but just so that people know that it's not just the 10 stormwater standards. There's a lot of other issues to unpack in there too, and I'm not saying that they're all like drastic and unresolvable issues either. I think they fall into the same category: more information, more analysis stuff. So I look forward to seeing the whole memo kind of addressed, because there's a bunch of other things too.
Jay, and to the board, perhaps a suggestion, depending on when we schedule the meeting and the discussion between ourselves and SciTech and the applicant, but would it be helpful, I think it might be helpful, if the board and we perhaps had an initial response from the applicant relative to which of the items that we cover they would consider future details. The O&M plan, I think, is a reasonable example of something like that. It is something that is needed, as we said, but it certainly is oftentimes a final detail after the final plan has been fully fleshed out. But I think if we knew ahead of time and the board knew which of the items from the comments and from what we're discussing they would consider part of this initial review that we would try and resolve together in the meeting, that would be helpful.
Know from who?
From the applicant to the
Yeah.
board?
Well, I mean, I think have that discussion. The thing I would always suggest that we focus on are basic feasibility questions, so that the systems that you're reviewing
Functions.
and the environmental impacts, are resolved. Kind of go, no-go things and big impacts to public health, safety, and the environment that
Okay.
we have to clear the decks of. Fine details, yes, absolutely. A condition in the permit that shall provide a separate O&M plan for construction level and post-construction level. Yeah, Absolutely. Do they have to do that now? No. What details you would like to see in that should be worked out so that so that we can form a reasonable condition within the permit that post-permit, prior to building permit, shall develop an O&M plan that addresses the following. That's good to know, but do they have to develop it now? That's the kind of thing, you're right.
So maybe what I would suggest, let me modify what I just said then. Why don't we, what would encourage, go through our numbered report, and we'll highlight for the board and for the applicant which of these comments we would consider important for this initial discussion, review, and coming to a resolution. And if they agree and the board agrees, we can schedule a meeting to focus on those items specifically.
Now, is that something that we could expect,
Early next week.
right, and then to follow up from that, the results from that, the information you get, is that another couple weeks after that? So are we 3 weeks away
No,
from?
what I was suggesting was, if the board and the applicant want to go forward with a meeting, we'll highlight in our letter which items we would focus on with SciTech and the applicant at the meeting.
I would almost say, and maybe we need some input from SciTech too, I would almost say maybe we should let them reply to all 43 comments, and we can read those replies, and where we don't see eye to eye are the ones that we need to really talk about, or, then also the biggest pieces too. But, if they simply are able to provide us a clarified answer and satisfies our comment, it might not necessarily need a meeting.
Perhaps,
So,
I guess we haven't coordinated our
But
responses.
whether the meetings do via email or in person,
Yeah.
you're gonna have to have that correspondence in
Or it
one
might
place.
shorten the meeting, if you
yeah,
guys are.
I think
That's
allowing
true.
them to answer these questions rather than picking out which ones we want them to answer.
Yeah, and I think that it was more not which ones they wanted answered, but when there's a priority to which ones need to be answered quickly, and other ones that need to be
Oh, that
100%
makes
answered
sense,
at the end,
yeah.
a little later on. I think that was the clarification we'll ask from you guys to
Right.
help us out
And
with
that was
it.
my initial thought. Let the applicant flag those things they're prepared to address and have SciTech address immediately, which clearly would be things, as Jay mentioned, would be the higher priority. And then we could have our meeting to focus on those topics. So however it works out, I think the approach is what I think the board is looking for.
So would SciTech be willing to,
Yeah,
Well, listen, I don't think that that's necessarily a bad idea. I don't think it's critical, because I think it's something that we would do kind of organically anyway as part of the meeting. But we can come prepared and say, hey, listen, we reviewed the 50 items, and here are the 35 that we think we need to address before the public hearing closes. Here are the dozen that we think we can make as a condition to the building permit or whatever. I do think, I would disagree with Scott a little, I think it would be beneficial for us to meet with them before we do a response, because it'll make our response better, not waste our time, there'll be some questions. So I think if some of the items are gonna take 5 seconds to go through and just to get everybody on the same page. Some will warrant more discussion or understanding. They might have some ideas that help us. SciTech might explain some things to them. So I would say we'll certainly come prepared mentally with our position on all these, but I think we would like the benefit of the meeting, and then we'll roll up our sleeves, and then we'll submit a formal response to them and the board. And prior to that meeting, we can endeavor to go through the list,
Yeah.
highlight or star or whatever, these are the items that we think we'll be doing, and these are the items that we want, if that makes sense, or we'll do later.
is that something you'd be willing to do,
No,
Dan?
I think
for us to-
that makes sense, because
And-
I agree, because some of these items, if we were in SciTech's position, they're not gonna have a response immediately. They're gonna have to either, go back and look at some original information, or do some calculations, or update some information. So I think highlighting the key things that we have the meeting to discuss will resolve many of those things, and then the things that are left over would be what SciTech would then develop in more full detail reflecting the questions we've asked, and there will be time for them after the meeting to do that. So I would agree with that approach.
Can the board leave it up to you guys to work that out, to get back with us, rather than us
Yeah.
getting involved in setting up the dates and
Yeah, we'll
times?
coordinate the timing, and, I mean, I think if we can do it as early as next week, I think that would be great, certainly no longer than the week after if conflicts, the schedule conflicts occur. But yeah, we'll try to do it as quickly and efficiently as we can, and then that will, I think, narrow the list of important additional details that the applicant and SciTech will then develop in written form.
Yeah, and just one other question. Do you have all the current information as to how the site sits today? Or do
My
you need anything
understanding,
more?
I'm not sure, my understanding is that there is an updated plan that SciTech has completed or is working to complete. That, we haven't seen that plan, am I mistaken?
I don't, we had a couple exhibits, Dan, but I think we'll confirm as much, but I think the plan set that you're working, or we're reviewing, is the latest. We did a lighting plan, we did a snow management plan, but that's not, I mean, not, the nitty gritty
Right,
civil
okay.
stuff.
So we'll assume our plan.
I guess I'm asking, when was the last as-built plan done? Is it recent enough that you need, are the elevations from
Latest current conditions.
At least I hope
latest
they
of
did.
current conditions? Are they
Our
from,
plan was
2008, 2005? I'm just kind of
September
confirming that.
29th.
Oh,
No, they
in
got-
terms of the
Existing
site data,
conditions.
the existing
Oh,
conditions
topo.
hasn't
Oh,
been
the topo.
updated
No,
in a
that's the
while.
original.
And there is a comment on that,
You're right, there
so.
was.
Well, that's what I'm asking. I mean,
Oh, I see.
at what point do you need to, I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
do we need
something
to
we
get an
would-
existing condition plan so that, it seems that you need the existing condition plans to make all this data relevant. If you don't have the existing conditions, what's there now, nothing else is gonna be accurate.
Right,
If
right, but
it's-
for example, the topo, we're not asking for an entire new topo plan. It may
Right.
simply be in our discussion with them and SciTech that
Update
spot
these areas.
elevations would be sufficient perhaps to demonstrate that their topo that they're relying on from 2008, I guess, is reasonably accurate. So there may be a solution that updates or confirms the topo, and that's what we want to look at. But we just don't have any information to confirm that 2008 topo hasn't changed significantly.
Is that part of what you'll discuss in your meeting?
Right.
Yeah.
All right, just to, as I say, I don't know, yeah, we had some questions about that, so we just wanna make sure that
Right.
that was, taken care of.
And spot elevations is a common practice to demonstrate that
Essentially update the 2008 plan.
if
If
it's
it needs to be
changed
changed.
significantly, and if it hasn't, show the elevation values that were taken in the field to demonstrate that the original plan is valid. So, but yeah, we'll talk about that at the meeting. So we'll schedule the meeting with the applicant SciTech, let the board know, and if the board wants to send a representative, I mean, we're in Dedham, we can do it at our offices or, yours, whatever.
Work for you all.
Did the board have any questions?
Now, do you have a copy of the most recent letter from the North and South River
Yeah,
watershed?
I think, yeah, we have their most recent letter, which came just yesterday or today.
Right.
Today, actually,
Today.
or
Today.
maybe
We also-
yesterday, yeah.
Yeah, and they also, there was a comment letter that they submitted to MIPA, I believe, some time back. We
Yeah,
saw that, but that's not
Yeah, because
relevant
there's
to our
some
focus.
real concerns about bacteria and stuff that I
Pollutants.
certainly wanted,
It's the
see
pollutants
it
which we
addressed, yeah.
flagged in our letter, yeah.
okay.
Was, I also wanted to make sure that there was some discussion of emergency access before.
The emergency management plan, as I referred to it.
And
think.
I believe there was an email from Annie, isn't that right? Email from the fire chief between the
Yes.
two meetings?
I think that was
That,
early, but pretty soon after the last
I
meeting,
think it was
right?
pretty soon after the last meeting.
I remember
don't
that.
know if the applicant team was in on that. I think he did seek some additional information. I would say in addition to the other homework assignments, make sure you coordinate with the chief.
Well, can I comment on that? A, I never saw that. B, we met with the fire department twice, and they signed off on the plan.
Well,
From our
then
perspective, so.
all the more reason then to just nail everything down. He had some concerns. I don't know if it was the same questions or not, Jeff, but I saw some things and some concerns on
I
it.
mean, I didn't get a copy of this, I mean.
I mean, we,
I'm not sure that I have,
It might be worth, just to circle
it could
back
have
with
come
him.
from, it could have come out of Brad Washburn's office too, I don't know. I saw an email since the last meeting. I think you should just talk to him, make sure you nail everything down. If I find the email, remind me and I'll get you the email. And it wasn't groundbreaking stuff. He had some lingering concerns on access
For
issues.
instance,
You know, these, in a flood condition, as Dan suggested, making sure he had access to all sides of the building. Especially, so, things like that. So, part of the process. I don't know what he said to you previously. All I know is I saw an email where he expressed some lingering, need for information.
Bob attended the second meeting.
I don't know what to tell you, Jeff. I saw an email, it expressed some concerns, it'd be a good, emergency access is pretty important, so we should nail it down.
Well, I would suggest that any correspondence, we get a copy of it when it comes out, and that's not happening, so we don't know these things.
I'm telling you, yeah.
Yeah, I think I've found the email,
We've had it
just
for
to
3
be,
weeks.
it looks like we got an email from Alfred Elliott on January 31st. Does that sound about right?
Sounds about the right time frame.
I didn't print it, so I don't.
Talking about a reply that he sent to Brad Washburn. And if I forward that to you now, you'll be able to make it available to whoever needs it. There we go.
And just to echo Bob,
Name, just,
Stephanie Keeper, counsel. for the
Thank you.
applicant. And just to reiterate, we'd like to request that we get copies of any submissions that are submitted to the board contemporaneously. This is somewhat of a surprise that everyone seems aware of an email that went 5 weeks ago and we've never seen it, so we can't be charged with being non-responsive when we don't.
no, we're not.
I don't
not
think anybody's
accusing
saying that, yeah.
We're just making sure that you got the information. It could have been an attachment.
If it's sent to, if it's sent to somebody else, and I'm not copied on it, I don't get it, I can't forward it.
Right.
But I have been forwarding everything that I've been getting. And if I haven't, it's been an oversight.
Yeah, just to be, I mean, there have been times where maybe we've put some semi-unreasonable expectations on you guys. I don't think this was one of them. I think Jay was just saying something to think of for the next meeting. I didn't see that he was coming from a place of why don't we have a response on that yet. So I think it's on your radar now. Let's say the clock starts now.
think the comment
We
was a
apologize
concern.
for the oversight thus
He
far.
says, he relooked at the plan, at the planning department's request. Looking at the plan again, I'm not sure if the plot plan allows for access from the access road to all portions of the east side of the buildings that limits the distance to 250 feet, and he's especially referencing, you know, kind of flooding conditions. So, mentions a couple things, we'll get you that, get your team to talk to him, or at least address that concern, I think would be great.
John, is now a good time to talk about lighting? or-
Well, I think what we might want to do is.
Sure, that's what I'm
Well,
asking, yeah.
We could open up I don't know that we want to, we could probably briefly open up to the audience if they have questions, but the drainage and engineering questions, we haven't really got answers on them yet, so we could discuss, but we're kind of discussing hypothetically till we get the next round of answers, if you will. You know, so there's a brief comment on that, although then we can kind of let you guys get going. But if there are any brief comments on that, we could just, again, keep in mind that we don't have all the information yet. It's going to be coming, so we can't discuss too much of the hypothetical as to what was. We're going to try to get the information so we have the facts to talk about those at the next meeting. Yes. Just his name and address, please.
Warner Borough, 15 Rockers Lane. I just wanted to comment on the site visit, and they were talking about calculations for the flooding. Actually, I think it'd be a great idea if Scott showed up at the property tomorrow. There's definitely been some discrepancies, I don't know if discrepancies is the right word, but different questions on elevations of that field and the way the water flows onto it from different sides of the property. I think it'd be really good for him to see how it all comes up from the different sides and then what the last scenario is. Calculations are calculations, and then there's reality, what people really see. I can give you a million examples, I'm sure you've seen them with calculations that I've done on properties and they haven't worked correctly or water's going different places. I mentioned in an email about the Walnut Hill development, water running down Old Oak and Bucket for years. You know, there's a skyscraper in San Francisco that's leaning because it wasn't built right, and that's a calculation. At least you can see it leaning now. So I encourage the board to have him look at the site, even film it with a video, and then we can all see the video.
Yeah, Frank Kilduff, 125 Chief Justice Cushing. I guess my comment is, will full adherence to standard engineering practices allow this building or this construction site to be appropriate in a highly inappropriate building spot without making the building so tall that it could just as easily be built on an island a mile offshore? Because there's no question good engineers can meet all the engineering standards. That isn't the question. The question is, will that engineering make this site a good site for 48 units?
David Holstein, 11 Martha's Lane. I'd be concerned with the, all the property to the south of it and up on 3A. As it consists now, most of that stormwater runoff runs northeast. So it's running towards the river and across the proposed site. If you raise all that land, that water's not gonna run that way anymore, obviously. It's gonna hit where it's been raised, and it's gonna run east, right onto my property, where I already have a quite severe flooding problem. Now, I know they're talking about putting a swale in there, but parts of that swale, the beginning of the swale, is only at the 7-foot mark. Even when it gets all the way around the corner to the south side of the project, so it's in my backyard, it's only at 8 feet and then gradually going up to 10. Well, how is that gonna work when we have high tides that exceed that amount all the time, and there's stormwater trying to go one way, and there's tidal water trying to come in the swale the other way? The swale's already gonna be full of tide water, and it's gonna overflow into my backyard.
I think that was one of the questions they had, if I'm not mistaken, that they had to post with them on their calculations, so they're gonna be looking at that.
Well, and by the way, I checked the tide charts today, up-to-date one for 2018. In 2018, it's estimated there's gonna be 448 tides over 9 feet. Almost every tide exceeds 8 feet. There's gonna be 128 tides over 10 feet. The back of my property line's not even at 10 feet. Some of it's not at 9 feet. When it's not flooded, by the way, the swale is also gonna be damp all the time, and it's just another mosquito and midge breeding area, which is also a big problem around that whole property. We have to have it sprayed every year by the Plymouth Mosquito Control Board.
They say that's one of the things they're gonna be looking at, so we will have some more information when they come back.
Well, while I'm at it, if I could, they also have a drawing that shows how that property, the building, looks over my property. I'd just like to point out, that's my property. I'm sure they're trying to show it for the height. You see where I put the black pencil mark? My roof line on their drawing is 33% taller than my house actually is. 12 feet. They have my house drawn at 36 feet tall. My house is only 24 feet tall.
Sandy Kingsland, 21 Martha's Lane. I would like to thank Mr. Holstein for bringing in his data.
And
Matt Kilduff, 125 Chief Justice Cushing. I think we've all heard today that, you know, this new construction will flood, or at least the garage portion is likely to flood at some point. Insurance-wise and liability-wise, are these people, 40B owners, going to be able to afford to insure this property?
I was,
We've had that, we've already
discussion.
asked that question, and we really haven't gotten an
Yeah, so
answer
forgive
yet,
me.
but, so, no, that's something that still has to be.
But they
Well,
probably-
wait,
No, we-
I'm
no, we've
I'm
had that
sorry,
answer.
but wait,
We've
wait,
had that
hang
answer.
on. That's a very good question, in my opinion, but I think we have gotten a decent answer to that question. Just to clarify my understanding, is that this is going to be a condominium development. So there's two levels of ownership. There's the overall ownership of the building, which during construction and until a certain number of the units have been sold, will be owned by the developer, and they'll be responsible for the overall insurance of the building as a whole. And the developer will hopefully, and part of that will be our review and state agencies' review, be financially stable and have sufficient insurance to ensure that. Individual unit owners will have insurance on their individual units. But they raise a point, and I'm sure what he's planning on raising is that the lowest individual unit is going to be well above even the most catastrophic of storms. So an individual unit owner isn't necessarily exposed to the insurance risk of flooding. Now, their car is in the garage, absolutely. The garage flooding and any damage from that, it's not like an individual homeowner is going to have to absorb that. That's going to be absorbed by the project as a whole and the whole project's insurance policy. Still a concern, but that's some of the clarification that I feel I've gotten thus far.
It wouldn't hold up in court.
Well,
It's
and-
not
but
expert testimony, it's just, we spoke to two different insurance companies, and they say, don't worry about it.
Wait,
So-
that's not true.
So-
That's what I read, I just read it
We
today.
spoke to two of the most prominent insurance brokers in the
You
South
didn't
Shore.
identify a single one of them.
Jeff Gordon in Norwell, Gordon Insurance. He's a
You didn't
huge
identify it
insurance-
in the paperwork, Jeff.
But that's not a fair representation, that we
Well,
didn't
it is
take it
fair.
seriously. We did. All the residential, to answer this gentleman's question, as Anthony said, all the residential units are out of the floodplain. So there'll be no difference relative to how they're insured than any other house in Scituate or condo that's out of the floodplain. The condo will need to carry some additional insurance, but it's not gonna be as catastrophic because all the residential square footage and the valuable stuff is out of the floodplain. There'll be consideration for the parking lot. So to represent it's this really significant, costly, challenging issue is not accurate.
I don't know
That's all I'm
anybody
saying.
represented that. I said the question, I don't think has been adequately answered.
So Sarah's certainly entitled to that opinion, and it seems like you're getting two ends of the spectrum. In my opinion, and I know a little bit about this because I understand the ownership structure because I'm a commercial real estate attorney, and I know a little bit about insurance. It could be catastrophic to the overall development, sure. If we get a 100-year storm, the insurance maybe isn't gonna cover 100% of it and whatnot, but just to answer your, part of your question specifically, I'm comfortable that I don't see an insurance risk to any individual homeowner for any flooding that is even astronomically possible. That's going to be a risk to the entire development as a whole, which, whether or not they're ready to handle it, they'll certainly be more ready to handle it than Susan, who lives in unit number 11.
You're not talking about the cars, we're talking about.
No,
just
the
the
cars, if they don't get moved, they're gonna be in big trouble. I don't think anybody's disagreeing with that. The cars are screwed if they don't get out of the garage.
But
Well,
Mr.
and I'm not worried about the property damage to the car so much as when you got a car flooded, don't you have issues with leakage of gasoline or oil, transmission fluid? I mean, we had on my office, a car come across the lot, hit something, leak transmission fluid or whatever, and we had to get,
It's gasoline.
toxic waste company to come up and dig a trench and burn all that soil.
Yeah, that's where I was disagreeing with you about the units. I couldn't agree with you more about that, and I think we're gonna need to see
Again,
more
they did
eventually.
ask for that in one of their,
Right.
The
one
comment
of the
does,
things. So we're gonna get
and
answers
it
to that.
applies to
Right.
stormwater as well.
Right.
I mean, the cars in the parking lot, or the outside cars that are parked,
Right.
there will be typical normal leaking of gas, oil, whatever fluids cars, contain, on an ongoing basis, not catastrophic leaking, just the dribs and drabs from cars running on the highways and roads and picking up that material. So that's something that we just want to show, ask the applicant to show how they've addressed that and whether their drainage devices are sized and designed to capture those fluids before they run out.
But to directly address Mr. Kilduff's concern, which is thoughtful, 40B, we all know that flood insurance is expensive, et cetera. We're talking about the garage level is subject to flooding. I think tomorrow to storm, they're talking 11.7. It's, the garage floor is at 12, so it's, even if this were constructed as
Meaning
of
the
tomorrow.
bottom of the garage is at 12.
Bottom of,
Yes.
even if it was constructed tomorrow, the waves may be lapping on the garage, but we're not talking about a flood situation. In the assumption of a 100-year storm, then we're at 16, right? And then, so now we've got 4 feet of water above what will be there tomorrow if tomorrow's predictions are accurate. But at no point, we'll still be able to walk in the garage, have our head above water, and have, 8, it's a 10-foot garage level? 8?
Probably 10.
It's 10 or 11, so we got 5 foot of water in it, 4 foot of water in it, and we're still doing okay. And the property owner, the condominium property owner, vis-a-vis flood insurance for that property, that component condo property is covered without an extraordinary risk, much less so than a single homeowner on a lot where the garage and the basement have all of the, mechanicals in it. So, I mean, your concern is well made, but it was asked and answered without specifics of how much, but certainly the applicant has made the inquiry and responded to us with that.
And just, everyone could humor me for 2 seconds. Sometimes you guys are gonna ask questions and which I or another member of the board might feel isn't that much of a concern, and something that's important to me, especially in a 40B, because the statute gives so many end arounds to a developer, is I want to spend the time that we have on some of the incredibly valid objections and concerns that we have to this plan, and not lose times on things that I feel relatively confident we're not going to get any ground on, either because it's not a valid concern or it is a valid concern that the law and the plan and the bylaw just doesn't give us any power to change. So I'm sure sometimes it looks like I'm dismissing concerns. It's because I want to score where we can.
I mean, I have a question, as we're on the insurance. We keep talking about the insurance being the building or whatever. Once the developer's gone, that insurance is absorbed by the condominium association, is it not?
Yes, as a
Okay.
whole was my point.
Well, as a whole, so each individual homeowner has a portion of that
Yes.
bill. All right, in a 40B, is the portion determined by percentage of ownership or percentage of value?
Either way, you can do it by percentage of value, meaning there's a differential between the sales price of the affordable and the market, and so that's the delta. Or you can do it on square footage so that you make them more equal if they're closer in size or exactly sized. The condominium law allows you to do either one. If you pick the square footage, so the condominium fees are higher for the affordable, the developer has to lower the price because the condominium fees are part of the 30% equation. So if the condo fees are up, the debt service has to go down because the ownership has to be 30% of somebody at 80% of the median. So some developers will say, no, I'm gonna pick value because I can sell the unit higher because their condo fees will be lower. This board can talk about that and say, well, we'd like it based on square footage so the condo fees are more equalized. You do that so you have a more harmonious community. That usually comes up if you have facilities and a swimming pool and everything where somebody's kids are swimming and paying 1/10 as somebody else, so it doesn't go real well. We don't have those kind of common area facilities where that comes up. But the condo dues can be looked at, and we have to show you what they are.
Bob, what's the, DHCD kind of toyed with that idea for a while. Is their preference not to stigmatize, or do they not have a preference either
They
way?
don't really have a preference, because we just tried that on in Newton the other day,
Okay.
and they said, hey, look, the board can decide that.
Do you guys have a preference so that someone might not complain that, because here, there's gonna be a significant delta between the sale prices, and if it was based upon value, the affordable units are gonna pay a substantial less in condo fees, and that might breed some enmity, because it's gonna be common knowledge among the condo trust. Do you have a preference as to what way you wanna do it?
Ask him.
I've been doing this for a long time, Bob.
Yeah, but he's taking.
I mean, Jay, it's a good question. We've done it both ways. Like, for instance, we have a 40B, an approved 40B in Weston, where if you did it on value, the market units are going to be somewhere between $1.5 million and $2 million, and the affordable would be 200. So in that instance, you're talking about a huge delta. In this instance, it'd still be a significant delta, but it would probably be closer to, 2.5 to 3.5 to 1. The question, Jay, we have not answered. I think we would be open doing it either on a property, a project in Needham, which was very upscale. We did it based on square footage, so the unit owners had a higher condo fee. We had to bring the sale prices down. So they were paying a condo fee that was pretty close to what the market units are paying. You can do it either way. The state doesn't have a strong.
What the state does have a feeling, they've raised it with us, that if you have a high condo fee for the affordable units, and then there's an assessment in 5 years, and the majority of people raise it for something, or they want a concierge, they want something else, that's more of a burden on the affordable people, because they're paying a relatively high fee for their income versus a low fee. So if the association decides to raise those fees, it doesn't hurt the affordables as much. That's one point of view. Somebody could take the opposite.
Either way, it's gonna tip over whether at the lower number or the higher number, it's could potentially go over the 30%.
Well, over time it will, yeah, but people's income may go up too. So it's a question of what you think is the most important. That's very hard.
And we've done it also, Jay, based on value, and a lot of the market buyers couldn't care less. I mean, they were concerned about what am I paying.
Until an assessment comes down the pipe.
Right,
Right,
and you can't afford it.
I'm talking about the delta in terms of
Yeah,
going
no,
in, 'cause you're right,
I'm concerned that when they have to do a new roof and they say, oh my God, we're gonna have to pony up this, and those 6 units only have to pony up this.
Right, it's a little different too here in that you have more units, so it's a little bit more diffused across
These
more
are
units.
questions that
but-
came up when this stuff started with the LIP program in 1987. I mean, we've had 35 years of mixed income condos that have worked out pretty well. Yeah, there's gotta be some unhappy people, but there's no on earth, I haven't seen any evidence of that. So really, it's a question of what, we'd like it to be harmonious, and we respect that if it's a high fee, it might hurt people in the future, but they're paying a low debt service because they're paying 30% of their income. So, that's not as critical.
So that's something that you might take a recommendation from the board
Yes,
on as we.
You guys talk about it, yeah, because
we would be open
Do
to
we
your
really want to get
suggestion
into
and your rationale.
No, but at least give it A or B if they.
I'm just thinking in terms of an airline, if everyone had a little name tag that said how much they paid for that seat, there'd be fistfights, because, it's like, and the condo association, they'll all know, so.
well, there's the other piece of that, we had this in Cohasset years ago, with this treatment plant, you want to have everybody pay the same because they all flush the same. So
Right.
you don't have them on a differential, but all the other things, they separated out. So there's a number of ways to get at that, okay, and we don't really care. It's, I've been battling it, or not battling, but talking about it for 40 years.
So are there any other questions for the consultants this evening? Board? Because I think we can let them.
Thank you. We'll
There was one.
contact.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Russ Land at 133. I just want to say that it's expected to be about 11.5 foot tide without the storm. It would be significantly higher, but my concern would be if they start cutting the soil off that property, and how can they possibly, control the site if it's supposed to, drain at elevation 8 and we have a 12-foot tide? Obviously, a silt fence isn't gonna keep back the ocean water.
That's a mitigation during construction you're talking about? Some of those answers will be coming
Right.
at our next meeting. That is part of what they're addressing, and they had some concerns and questions about that as well.
Just doesn't
in
seem
the
like
plan.
it's possible if there's a flooding event to control that.
I would have to wait and see. I hear your concerns.
It's a good question.
But as I say, some of that will hopefully be answered.
What do you anticipate the length of construction start to finish? Assuming you get permitted, and there's not 12
18
years
months.
worth of appeals.
14 months, between 14 and 20 months.
A long time.
I will add a question that we have a lot of fill in this property, and I'm reminded of beaches that have been replenished and they disappear with the ocean waves. I know this isn't a wave action area, but along that same lines, with clean fill, the finest you can get, all of that likely, and I'm not questioning it, but we're going to have disturbed soils on the top of the undisturbed, subterranean. I'd like to know how the dynamics of the minor wave action, but tidal action, will affect those fills as they come in, and if there's concerns or protection taken to make sure that it's reinforced or hardened. I don't mean hardened in terms of concrete, but
Not washed away.
plantings or plantings that are
In the
embedded in
early
the
stages.
early stages, so it doesn't start to wash away and erode soon before
It can be
the
stabilized.
plants get stabilized and set.
We'll have to look at that, but we didn't specifically flag that question.
Because we do have something like 23,000 cubic yards of fill in this.
We'll look at that a little more and have that discussion with the applicant and their engineer.
Thank you.
And John, we'll let you and Jay know.
Yeah, so when you could send us a schedule appointment, that would be helpful. All right, thank you. Do we have some more questions for the applicant?
Yes.
I have a couple.
I don't know if Jay-
Yeah, I've got a couple. but-
Yeah, well, I can go last. Why don't you guys ask what you want to?
I just have one on the lighting. Are we talking about the lighting? We tabling that for now? We want to do it next time?
We don't have we don't have a light.
Oh, we actually did. We got one.
All right.
But we can wait of whatever. I'm fine with whatever. I just want to know if.
No, we go ahead and help you as well. Get some, the more we get out.
Yeah, I actually want, there's something I don't see in the lighting plan that I want to understand. I see where the lights are, I don't see where they shine.
We had a housekeeping issue was the extension for the
Yeah.
permit was, we sent you guys a week ago, 2 weeks, runs out in April from the original one, so in order to keep the hearings going, we ought to get the extension and keep the permit alive. Makes sense to run together, so.
I thought it ran until 2019. Did I misread something?
Yeah, it's
That's
April.
a superseding order of conditions.
Oh, that's what I read.
Yeah, we came back, we went into June to the board and asked for an extension of the permit. They gave us till April, okay? April.
We thought we were gonna be done.
Oh.
I would have liked that too.
Yeah, so we ought to get a vote at some point. We'll wait the letter.
Well, we submitted a formal request.
Yeah.
Came to us on the 8th
February.
of February. You've got it in your,
Geez, I didn't get that.
Annie.
Now, who's
You
not?
were copied
I was not.
electronically.
So, we all know now. And,
it's a Feb.
so we need to vote on that before
It's
our next
dated
meeting,
February
right?
6th, extension request for comprehensive permit, Herringbrook Meadows, dear board members.
We can review it at some point. We'll be taking it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not April now, but I mean, it's just a matter
Yeah.
of keeping up.
No, it's not.
Okay, I'm apologetic if you were.
No, don't worry about it, I don't care,
Do
I'm
we-
just giving you a hard time.
Do we need to vote on it? Because it may be April
No, I don't
before our
want you in my
next
office,
meeting.
Bob.
Oh, no.
You're gonna do another meeting in the next 30 days?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Can't wait.
We do have some more questions for you guys too, well, Jay, so I don't know, you can stay in your seats or you can step up to the table, it doesn't matter. I don't know how close you wanna get to us, but
You look
that's all right.
cozy.
I mean,
Don't
could we
be
even
scared.
I know
Could this even be
Anthony has some
rejected
questions on
in
the
the midst of
lighting,
a-
and then also, we
extend it
we
to
will
the
open it back
end
up
of
to
this
the audience
proceeding.
after this round.
Maybe that makes
So if there are
more
more
sense.
questions or concerns that you guys have, you'll have
Right, I mean, they will know.
another
No, I
time
don't know
to
how we could
answer that tonight.
not extend it to the hearing.
So just on the lighting plan, I saw that you guys submitted, I see where the lights are. I want to understand a little bit more, and I'm guessing some of the audience does too. Where do they shine? How far are they going to shine? Things like that. I'd like a little more information on that.
Okay, well, I'll ask honestly the architect and our landscape architect, develop that plan. We can do that. I think the important takeaway, and the neighbors should realize, is the lighting plan complies with all Scituate bylaws. We're not asking for waivers on anything, so we're happy to provide it, but we're not looking for any special consideration.
Did you guys
on
give a
lighting.
photometric plan that
We
showed it?
submitted a lighting plan, we submitted some sample fixtures and whatnot.
Right, but not a photo, not like a true photometric, right?
No.
So-
If you have it, I'd love to see it. I understand what you're saying, but I think there's so much concern about so many things. The more that we could fully and completely cross
Do
off.
that, but even
At
if
least
we're
this looks like
saying,
it just
listen,
went to Ann.
we can't shine lights in the areas that aren't allowed.
And
to
she
be
forwarded it
complied.
to-
I mean, I'm not trying to be argumentative, but.
No, I understand what you're saying,
I just
but,
wasn't gonna
All right,
you
let me
know,
see what
we have a
can do.
responsibility, you have a responsibility to get us comfortable, we have a responsibility to get them as comfortable as we can. I think that'd be useful to that.
Fair enough.
Did we get an updated waivers plan? I was noticing we'd asked for one a long time ago.
So my sense on that is first of all, I'm less concerned about like dimensional waiver stuff than the dimensions are the dimensions. If it comes down, I think let's let the engineers have at it. They're talking about a couple other bylaws that they're flushing through. The dimensional stuff I don't really worry about, because if you guys approve a plan, you're gonna approve it with all the warts on it, in terms of the dimensional stuff.
Yeah.
As long as you know what those dimensions are, I don't think we have to worry about that too much. If it comes down to some of the peripheral bylaw issues that we've talked about, the floodplain stuff or that wetland.
Peripheral? I think
No,
the
no, no, no,
floodplain
no,
is
no.
hardly peripheral.
No, I don't mean that. I mean not a non-dimensional. So, or the wetland regulations that may apply. Those are things that we'll have to discuss. If they need, after they get through engineering, waivers from any of that, then I think those are bigger ticket items, but we know what they are.
Yeah.
So,
And I think, just for everyone who's here and for our viewing audience, and Jay, please make my explanation better to the extent it needs to be. What we're talking about with waivers is, this is a big development, and people have stated that they feel it doesn't belong here. To the extent this development of whatever size complies with the zoning bylaw, we don't have any power to necessarily to make them change those portions of the project. So we need to determine what parts of the project do not comply. Is that accurate?
well, kind of, yeah.
That's what I was going for,
I'd
kind
say
of
so.
accurate.
Certainly on the dimensional side, yes, if they comply with something dimensional, no, but it's really kind of a special permit. I think when we get into it with 40B, yes, it requires a detailed waiver list, and, you know, we could be mining down into that at every single meeting and say, oh, you changed something, let's get a new waiver list. Just in my experience on the dimensional stuff, the plan is the plan on the box of what they're doing and the setbacks and everything else. I prefer to focus, as Sarah's corrected me, on the things that affect kind of public health, safety, things that are more weighing whether or not you can allow the use through the things that would normally be a special permit. And you've had two pieces of litigation under a particular bylaw that is, given people concern here. They're seeking a waiver from that bylaw. So those are things where you have to weigh that waiver request more. I don't think of all the things we should be troubling the applicant with in terms of getting info to you. I just don't see that at this juncture. When we get down to it, we'll know where the fault line lies in terms of the things you want to discuss with them on waivers and not. So I think that, you know, they could give there's some existing waiver requests. I would prefer to wait and discuss that later.
Yeah, if I may, typically we give the waiver list, I mean, we still have obviously some potential tweaks to the plan going through the process with Woodard and Curran. Sometimes waivers get added, more frequently sometimes waivers get taken off because they're no longer necessary. But we're gonna get to a point, as Jay said, where the plan is the plan and we need the waivers that we requested to build the plan. And we're not there yet, and I think it's a better use of the board's time if we finish vetting the plan and then we'll submit an updated waiver list based on the plan set of record.
And when I draft a decision, and Sarah and Ed have certainly seen some of my decisions in the past, there's a section on waivers and it says you get all the waivers you need to build the box, and then there's some additional commentary on other waivers, and here we have some of those ones that may apply in terms of, you know, floodwater and stormwater and, you know, whatever wetland bylaws you have under your jurisdiction, things like that. And we'll discuss them, but you know, for them to list out at this point, I need this height one in this corner and this setback one here, I don't think is a good use of their time and probably unnecessary for us to dive into. Right?
And then, Sarah, you guys, anything else? Lighting? I just had a couple of questions to it. Actually, three probably. Just, yeah, I know when you construct in a floodplain, there's a certain type of construction you're going to need to build by there, but also with the new building code coming out too, we've got windborne debris. You know, we're in the 110-mile-an-hour wind zone. Are you guys going to take precautions to satisfy those needs as well? You know, with the structural engineer.
Yeah, but our architect isn't here to answer that, but he's the
No,
one
but
that
it-
Well, I can, I mean, we'll adhere to every building code, there's no variation in that. I mean, if it's applicable, we have.
It's not
to
optional.
look at it. To your point on the foundation, we have not gone to that level of detail yet. I mean, we have reason to believe we can do a traditional spread footing foundation. In a few areas, there might be some other type of foundation, but we have not gone to that level, but we obviously have to satisfy the building inspector that it's gonna all work, so.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, soil test and determination will.
Yeah, and that will all be, you know, that's a construction level detail. It would all be part of our building permit set and, you know, certainly very important to us, so.
Yeah, and the other thing, we kind of briefly discussed it probably 2 meetings ago, but, and there's been some concern with the height of the building. I know drawings look good and stuff, and we talked about it briefly, but we still haven't got an idea of, you know, I asked about a balloon test or something to see, you know, where you can see it from the North River, where the neighbor's gonna grasp on this, how high it's gonna be. Can we revisit that and get something in place there? Because I think, you know, when you're looking at a piece of paper and, you know, drawing a map and penciling over, that's one thing, but I think to really kind of put it in perspective, that's something that needs to be done on site, just to see how high is 46 feet? You know, how high does it look? I know you.
Listen, I will continue with my mantra in that we will do it to satisfy the board, but height under 40B is based on impacts, and what are the impacts? And we did a very detailed shadow study that clearly showed at our current height, we're really not impacting anybody. So that's what would be, you know, relative to how is height measured. If the board and the neighbors are interested in seeing the balloon test, we'll do the balloon test. But we've represented the height in a more specific and tactical way relative to what are the impacts as opposed to how high is the balloon in the sky. I will do it, you know, it's a pain, but I'll do it.
I think we've had some people ask about it in the
What is
past.
the height?
Well,
What is
like the four corners of the building, so everyone has a rough idea of how high this is, including the fill.
Listen, and the building's the building, and I think we addressed this at the first hearing, and our architect did. There's are people interested in what is the apparent height? Because that is very different than what the building inspector or how the town calculates height. So there's two different things.
I think the peak height.
We did a
Looking at
representation
peak.
of both, and quite frankly, it was convoluted because it's confusing. The balloon height, I think, will at least represent, the perceived height per se, but there's two different things, just so the neighbors understand, if the building is.
But I think they realize that you might put 10 feet of fill and then your building starts, or whatever it is, but I think they kind of, they're standing in their backyard, how high are they
But
gonna
it's
see?
not just the fill, it's the way the height from, I forget if it's existing mean or average mean or
Mean,
finished
the
grade or
average-
whatever
mean.
it is. It's a convoluted formula.
But I don't, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a neighbor. If my house is next to this development, I don't really care about the height under the code. We certainly do. I'm not sure I would if I was a neighbor. I would care where the peak of that roof is and how high the sun has to be before I could see it out my window. And I understand what you're saying, that a balloon isn't gonna satisfy everyone on that. It's gonna be more information than they have now.
But it might give them an idea of, we might need a different type of tree cover here, we might need this, so I just think it might be helpful.
Look, you guarantee us no wind, and we'll give you a balloon test.
Yeah, we're not asking for it tomorrow.
And they blew so much and they broke, and so it's very difficult, but we'll try it. Okay, we'll let you know.
Let's do it tonight.
Can we just, we'll open up the,
We'll do it tomorrow, in the middle of Friday afternoon. Okay,
Yeah,
so-
Frank Kilbuck,
75
125 Chief Justice. What is the height above level ground, or say compared to 3A, the level of 3A? And will a waiver be necessary for that, as it'll likely be quite a bit above the standard for the town?
I think there's a height waiver request, right?
There is a height waiver request, and I can get, if you're looking for the height from 3A, like in other words, how, from the 3A grade, we can provide that number to you. Honestly, I don't know it off the top of my head, but if you give me till the next year, and we'll provide it.
I don't have it in my, I had it before, but I don't have it in my package now.
Should be an elevation.
It's just doing the.
I'm sure we have the information to do
Existing
that
pavement,
calculation.
existing pavement elevation at 3A is 17.2. So that's, when we're talking about elevation, 17.2, think of
And that's how
the,
you go finished grade to
So our
the.
first floor is 22.
so,
So your first
Probably
floor is,
about
yeah, it's,
41 feet, 42.
I got a lot of pages.
None of those that you
Should be right here.
it's, the information is, just good luck, the information is there, and we've actually talked about it a
Right.
couple of times.
She's right.
I-
69.
Set of plans shows two different sets of heights, it's two different architectural things depending on whether they were loft type.
I think that,
Building was involved or not, and they were two separate heights.
I think that had to do with the calculation under our building code, not the actual height of the building. Our building code has to do with the midpoint between the eave and the ridge, not the actual ridge. And obviously, we're talking about the perceived ridge. So I appreciate that, yes, there's a discrepancy, but it has to do with architectural calculations to meet the building code, not what the building's actually the height is. I mean, there was a specific height of the ridge.
Specific height.
It looks like if 3A is at 13, the roof
17.
peak's at 69. Oh, so it's at 17. The roof peak on this plan is at 69. So I went to law school. I'm not
52
capable
feet.
of that math, but I think you guys could do it.
52 feet above.
There you go.
And the standard for the town is?
Well,
That's where it gets
different.
complicated.
That's what I'm
The
asking.
town is from grade.
Right.
So grade.
Not from Route.
Grade at the site, not grade at 3A.
I don't know, 30-something feet probably, I guess.
35.
35 feet, but that's to the midpoint of the eave to the ridge.
Maybe almost 20 more feet.
Yeah.
No, not really, because the
No,
grade
no.
is going to go up, the grade
6 feet.
on the property is different from the grade at, we talked about the grade at the
but
street.
The grade at the property is 6 feet higher than the street, so the building starts from there. So, you know, it could be, you know, if it's 35 feet is mean, it could be,
So it'll be 6 feet higher than 3A.
yes, the
So
ground.
then you add on.
That's
At the ground.
the grade, but we were, what Anthony calculated was elevation, elevation, well, we calculated it relative to 3A, and we're doing seat of the pants calculations here, which is the wrong way to do it. So I'm going to ask the applicant to, the bottom line is, this information is there. We do have it. They're not, I just don't want anyone to think they're trying to
And the
put one
shadow
over
study
us.
is based on what height?
That height.
Based on the exact
That
design of the building.
Specific apparent height and shadow. No,
No, it's
the actual height of the
the
ridge.
actual height. They're not playing with numbers with the shadow study.
Right,
On
the
how
shadow
high it's
study,
gonna
yeah.
be above the core of the earth and above sea level. There isn't any play in that math.
So that was altitude.
Yeah.
height.
Right.
That's right.
Elevation.
So, maybe, Mr. Circle, are you telling me that this massive building is not going to shadow Marcus Lane?
Yes.
Yes, we are.
Yes.
I don't believe it.
Look at the plans. Look at what we said.
We did a detailed shadow study at the last.
Well,
meeting.
the other thing,
Just,
but-
if we could just go back and forth there. They did, that was shown at one of the meetings too. The architect spoke about it and showed it different, I think it
The
was
sun
4
isn't
different
gonna
times of the
go
year, or
north.
3 different times of the year as to what, or 4.
4 times of the year, 3 times a day.
but it also has to do with the fact that we're talking about shadow, and the sun transits in the southern hemisphere,
Yeah, rises, it will cut off.
but Martha's Lane is to the south of the building. You don't get shadows to the south.
She's talking about Marcia's house.
No.
Give me any information on that.
That one we did.
Now, she's
That,
in front.
no, that's the northern house, and there is the shadow
Onto the property. but-
showed the shadow hit that came to the property, but didn't go anywhere near the house.
And also, our shadow study did not take into account any existing vegetation on any of the sites.
Which is also already shadowing the sites. And again, I'm going to kind of piggyback off what Anthony said. These are all legitimate concerns, and we're not trying to diminish them, but we're trying to recognize the need for, to address issues that we have, concerns that are part of what we can do something about.
That's all right.
That's the shadow study.
Were there any other questions? Yes.
Warner Borough Martha, 15 Martha's Lane. All these calculations that they're doing, like Leonard and Carlin's looking at, that's all off the data that was given, 13 years ago?
No, some of it is more current than that, and what they need updates from, they're gonna be getting some upgrades from, so they're gonna confirm what the site is today compared to the 2008 map. So a lot of this information will be updated and taken care of. It's not, they're not making it up, so it will be the real data.
My question would be like, I know like the ILSF, if that's gotten any bigger, because of all the erosion, you'll see tomorrow things are washing around. I mean, the earth is being moved there with all these tides.
And some of the updating that they're doing from the 2008 plan, those spot elevations and tests that they're gonna do, that's what's gonna update, so the existing conditions will be more current than they are in the
Will
old
they
map.
be spot checking that ILS?
I'm not sure what they did,
size?
but they'll
Thank you.
spot check what they need to update the map. Hey, yeah.
Just a quick comment on
Sure.
the shadow study. I did ask if they would show it like earlier in the day, because currently from my house, I can watch the sunrise in the summertime directly through where these buildings are supposed to be. So my effective horizon would be about 50 feet high. That would be about 100 feet away from these buildings. So it would be a significant amount of time with the shadow in the morning.
Where it's not gonna show.
Well, shadow.
It wouldn't shadow you, but it would
shadowed
obstruct your
And the
view.
ability to see the sunrise at a certain point, different things, right? Just because something's blocking your view of the sun doesn't necessarily mean that it's casting a shadow
It absolutely
on
has to
where
be
you
a
are.
shadow if it's between me and the sun.
I'm not so qualified to have that argument, but I'm not sure that's the case.
It may cast a shadow, but it's not casting a shadow that's affecting you. It is impeding your view of the sun, but as are the trees that are taller than that on the site already. So yes, we have a building that's going to be tall, but we have trees that are tall. And in the summer, when those trees are leafed out, they're obstructing your view too. So, I mean, we just have to stay in the world of reality and not.
I understand, but
I don't disagree with you, but the bottom line is we have an applicant before us who has a legal right to do certain things with their land and their hair, asking us to clarify what they can do. And under the law, there are things that they can do, and we have to try to address those things. So.
I wasn't
Just
here
name
last-
it,
Oh,
name it.
sorry, Peggy English, One Circle. I wasn't here last.
Could we do that again?
Peggy English, sorry.
Peggy
I
English.
speak too fast. One Circle. I wasn't here the last, meeting, but the meeting before, you had an issue with her about clearing 6 feet on 3A, or, clearing the natural, trees on 3A. She had said it came in.
Well, just a minute, who had an issue of,
I don't-
This man here had an issue with
or
her.
a question?
Yeah, something, I think.
Oh,
You don't remember? Okay, so I remember really clearly, because I live on 3A and I can't stand when they clear the trees. What is the issue with clearing 6 feet of 3A?
I didn't have an
Well, what it was
issue.
exactly was.
We had an issue about the applicability of certain bylaws, but no, I recall the issue being
Right.
discussed as it applied to certain standards that the town had in terms of clearing on 3A, but
Right.
it wasn't a question for the two lawyers.
I thought you said that it was in the original applicant, so therefore they could clear, and you said, no, that was not a settled answer, that you weren't sure that they could clear. My question is, can they clear, like they think they clear the trees on 3A?
I think
6 feet.
I believe they're leaving,
I don't think.
I think they're leaving most of the
I don't
trees.
I honestly don't really remember that, but I think I don't remember that discussion, but this I do know, our intent is to leave 3A as undisturbed as possible, and I think we've done some pretty good renderings showing what 3A will look like with the building. So most of it will be undisturbed. There's a couple kind of scrubby bushes / trees we might take out and replant, but for the most part, particularly in the spring, summer, and fall, you're really not gonna see anything from 3A because we're leaving the vegetation and the trees along 3A because for that very reason, it's a good buffer.
Yeah, I think your interests in not seeing a massive building from 3A are sort of aligned with the interests of them wanting to have the most valuable property that they can,
Right.
and their residents not seeing 3A from their bedroom. I think of all the areas we're gonna talk about here, I think you guys are in agreement on that, and they're gonna endeavor to do things you want them to do in that regard. I think everybody's looking for the same thing there. It's best for you and it's best for them.
I think the only other thing, if we want to,
Yeah, so
Jay had a couple.
I was doing some research just on the evolution of kind of construction in the floodplain, because it isn't like it used to be. It used to be that this would be a non-starter, and just kind of looking at the standards and came across some things, and this is by more of a question, because I really don't know how this gets resolved at the end of the day, but I'd love to, at the next session, probably more for Stephanie than anyone else. I don't know exactly how you want to look at it, but I did forward some info today. There's both a HUD standard for when you get federal subsidy, and, there's, yeah, New England funds kind of, but not really a federal subsidy, but it is, and HUD doesn't oversee it, but so be it, in terms of what you would have to do if you're building in the floodplain, and there's some alternatives analysis. And then there's an old Dukakis era executive order that is still valid, that talks about extending federal or state subsidy, which mass housing technically is, in terms of building in the floodplain. So I'd like to hear from you guys on that. Yeah, I'd like to hear it. Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to hear that. I'm not resolved one way or the other on it. I do think it's something that we should address.
Okay.
I don't want to leave it, because I think there is somewhat of an issue there, but I'm happy to be persuaded that it's not something we have to be.
Also, if both of those orders, the federal and the Dukakis era at 149, were to apply, they go to the agencies and not really the applicants.
Right, but fundability got
yeah.
thrown into these boards through a more recent case, and I understand that Mass Housing will say, we'll pick it up at final approval, but I think it's something that I want to at least, I want to dot that I. So I look forward to a memo.
Don't you have enough to do to be doing this kind of crazy research on this stuff?
You know what, I'm thorough.
That's why he's here.
We'll address it in a written.
We will address it.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. Again, I'm
Can I ask
happy
one
to
more?
be persuaded that it shouldn't be an issue, or that we can address it later, but it is a box I'd
Well,
like
you've
to.
already written to Mass Housing, so they'll.
Well, but I was dissatisfied with their response, as I almost always am, that when they say, oh yeah, don't worry about it, we'll pick it up at final approval, because that to me is insufficient on matters that pertain to flooding, you know, so, I mean, we know that this project, if it was under the local bylaws, would never get approved, so it's a serious question for us.
Got it.
So,
Understood.
got it.
I'd like to just raise one question for myself, and I just don't know where it fits, and I don't even know what the answer is or even how to format the question. But we're looking at 23,000 cubic yards of fill. If I'm not mistaken, a 18-wheeler is 10 to 15 cubic yards?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 15.
They call them, yeah, they
It
call
was a
them.
big one.
Yeah, we're talking an awful lot, what, 1,500 loads of fill on an 18-wheeler. You guys are willing to?
Tell you how many trucks there might be and what.
It's gonna be
No,
more
we
than
want to
that.
understand how you're
I'm-
going to do it.
It's not so
a
much-
very valid
it's
question.
not so much-
2,000 trucks.
I wasn't going to
Just
ask
a
how many
joke.
trucks. I was going to say, you really want to do that? I mean, that's a huge, it's a huge amount of fill. And for me, I grew up, my father was a developer, so I've been around some of it. And as wetlands protections and other things came into being, he lost, building lots because they were too close to water resources or other things. And I mean, I'm familiar with how we've reduced areas for building that were once considered prime lots. And here we have what I would have considered an unbuildable lot, and it certainly would be under our town bylaws. And I guess I'd love to be comforted in the sense that it makes sense to put 23,000 cubic yards of fill into what is currently tidal in many respects. Granted, it might be tidal in extreme, but it is somewhat tidal. It's certainly in the floodplain. And I'm not asking for an immediate answer, but I'd love to be persuaded as to why that really makes a lot of sense.
Well,
We will
my
too.
dad said, I'm not sure can you give
No,
me a little?
we'll talk about it.
Yeah, I don't, as I said, I don't even know what my question is. I just know that we've got,
We need a full, clean mental health check on both anglers, so we understand why you're.
that's
No,
kind of
but-
what I'm saying.
My dad seems to know what the answer is, so I'll wait and hear from you.
Well, and also, kind of.
I spent a lot of years acquiescing to my father, too, so.
Well, also getting back to his question too, I mean, again, part of the project management, keeping that is, you are bringing 2,000 trucks in just for fill. So, they have to get on the site, off the site safely in a manner, so that's also one point that, might want to be addressed at some point. But, we might want to think about that, and I think that's probably
Well, as part
not
of,
his whole question, and we don't need that answer tonight, but it should be addressed as to,
As Bob would know, not Bob my dad, but this is,
Bob the builder?
Bob the builder. This-
Our Bob the Builder.
It is a lot of fill, unquestionably, and we will endeavor. And I know the board and the neighbors might not agree with me, but compared to so many sites I am working on and developing now, this site is very easy from a constructability standpoint. There's plenty of staging area, there's plenty of rooms. Yes, it's a lot of trucks, and we'll endeavor to answer that, but it's not a difficult site. I mean, there are difficult components of it, I'm not diminishing that, but in terms of access, staging, tightness, it's not a difficult site. I mean, compared to how much of the site we're occupying with building and impervious area, I should say, it's not a difficult site. You should see the sites in Brookline and Wellesley and.
I gutted a 5-story on Beacon Hill. You don't have to explain it to me. I do appreciate what you're doing here, but I do.
We'll try and get you something.
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
Just real quick, Matt in 5 Martha's Lane, you mentioned trucks and everything kind of, given the traffic on 3A, would there be a full police detail to steer the trucks on and off of 3A?
that's gonna depend on usually there, probably at some points there will be, I would imagine, if needed, depending what they do.
We're gonna require a condition that says that they're gonna work with the police department to develop a trucking route and all the details they need. That's a pretty standard condition, especially with a roadway that has that much traffic, so that they could stay away from the peak hours and we manage it right, the idling of trucks, all that stuff. That's definitely a post-permit item. I don't think we have to worry about it, but it is on the list, so.
Yeah, we always have a concern, and we always try to remind the public that construction is not permanent. Construction ends. 18 months to 2 years, that's not the fill part. I mean,
Most of that
all,
inside the building.
I mean, look at the project that's going on in Greenbush. That's been, because it was prefabbed, it went up in about 3 days, and they've been spending, months now finishing the interior and getting the sidewall on. It's, it's not 18 months of trucks driving by all the time. But we do appreciate your concern, but it also is temporary.
Yes.
This question may not be to anybody in this room, but is there any, and it may have been covered prior, not likely covered prior, but is there any knowledge or plan future sidewalk situation, putting a couple hundred people, that close to the planned development in Greenbush? I'm sure they're gonna wanna access it by foot at some point.
They're putting a suspension bridge over the river and coming in off of the old.
It was raised.
It was raised.
Wasn't necessarily flushed out.
It's been under discussion for a long time.
And I don't think it hasn't been tabled. It's an interesting question and one I think the board shares.
And part of I think some of the concern was that also it's a state road, so
There's
not
a lot
like-
of cooks in the kitchen.
It's a
It's
state
a-
road, but it's a state approved.
I can also,
Right,
They just put about a mile of sidewalk down on Marshall.
yeah, I can also say that of the issues that we can consider here in terms of the project changes, the issue of connectivity and kind of smart growth was in the last go-round, the litigation that these developers weren't a part of, and the courts resolved that issue. It's not something that we can revisit. I still feel that there may be some legitimate concerns by the municipal officials that there's a lack of connectivity for pedestrians here, but that issue's foreclosed for this go-around because it's already been litigated,
Totally
so.
understood, not looking for an answer
Yeah.
necessarily, just,
a good point. Yep. Well, there's no other questions, but two things that we could schedule our next meeting, and also if we could bring a time for the balloon test, or if you could get a window for it there, that you don't want, I know you don't wanna do it.
No,
but-
no, what we'll do is, let me talk to my architect.
When
I
was our
understand,
first
I
hearing
think,
session?
I gotta figure out how we're gonna
Next
do
hearing
it
session?
effectively,
No,
where
when
we're
was our
gonna do it.
first one?
And then let us
Keep
notify
an eye on the
the
180
board in
days.
advance of when we're gonna do it, and then people will know about it.
December,
They'll
just
be
before
up,
Christmas?
you know.
Yeah, we've had others in town before.
Yeah, December.
Cell towers and other projects, so
5th? No.
that would be good. And then, for the
Okay.
board, do we have, do we wanna meet?
December
There it is.
7th.
Right here?
Well, I guess, how long, what's too soon and what's too long from now to meet?
When they can they get.
Well, we have to extend the, permit, so that's April, what was it?
First.
Why,
April 1?
why are we kicking the can on doing that? What's the benefit of not extending it tonight?
So here's what I would suggest, is that you extend it, they're not building the other one anyway, so.
Right.
I would,
Just extend it now, right?
Why don't we move to extend the permit through this application?
I can't,
I mean,
gotta
keep,
get a date.
no,
well.
why?
Do
so
you?
it's- Well, why don't you do it to the approximate, and so that there's gonna be a new, I mean, if it ends up being a denial, then, I mean, they're not building the other one
So
anyway.
then let's
I'm
extend it for
following
60 or 90 days. It's, no?
I would say that, maybe.
6
by-
months?
And do a 6 month is
Done.
probably fine.
Yeah.
What was stated in the application, in the request for extension, was that it's now permitted until April 1, 2018. That's everyone's recollection, so.
If we could add October 1st, 2018?
Oh my God, I will kill myself.
No, it won't be that long.
That's the original, that's the
This is
underlying.
the original.
That's not this hearing.
No, no, no.
No, that's the underlying permit.
That's fine with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
October.
If we want to have a motion for October 1st?
Yeah, I would make a motion.
Motion to extend the existing permit up until October 1st of 2018.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
That's, okay.
All right,
I didn't understand why
No,
we don't
yeah.
want to leave that for another day.
Right,
I'm not
but-
sure there was a reason
Yeah,
to.
if something happens and we don't want to expire on it either. So, our next meeting then, we probably have to,
So, Jay, the applicant,
I would
how
say-
long do you need in order for the next meeting to be
That's not gonna
effective?
be terrible, 'cause I don't have my episodes.
oh, you
Can we
want
do 4 weeks, is that, because then
So
that would allow us, because we have, admittedly, we have some,
Of course.
a decent amount of work to do.
Is that the
The
29th?
29th.
That's
That's
the
Monday,
29th.
Thursday.
29th of March.
Is that it? Or no?
That's
That's
that's the Thursday before Good Friday.
So it's good, Holy
It's
Thursday.
Holy Thursday, Monday, Thursday. I'm just,
29th?
It's fine, I think it's really gonna be driven by the engineers more than anything, so if they're comfortable with the 29th?
To be safe, we're gonna meet with them next week.
Could we do one more week, maybe?
That's the
April 5th?
Yeah.
April 4th? No.
Just so we know that if we need another hearing after that, then we're butting, the next one after that is, I think, around the 180.
Yeah,
So
we
let's
we
just,
appreciate that.
okay, so we just want to make sure that we can round out as much as possible.
We're gonna need, I mean, listen, I'm an optimist, but I don't think at the next hearing, we're gonna have all these issues buttoned up. So, we're gonna need another hearing after the next one.
Right, so I just want everyone,
I'm aware. of
okay,
that.
good.
the 5th is the 6th day of Passover, so you just don't want any conflicts, we're all set. No, the 5th of April. 5th of April is the 6th day of Passover. So I'm getting Easter and Passover, getting all the, no one has plans. It's not school vacation, I don't care. I'll be here. Okay, is that today?
Good.
All right, so April 5th. Do you want to try to get this room in?
Everyone fit here tonight. It was by necessity, but it was good enough.
Yeah.
Numbers seem like it's comfortable.
Thank you.
And thank you too for the audience members for the their help with this, and we do get the email that gets sent in, and question that's helpful as well. So we need a motion.
Motion to
Move to
adjourn.
continue, move to continue this hearing. Do we get the motion to
You.
continue?
I don't think
Move
we
to
did, no.
continue the hearing till April 5th at 7 PM, tentatively at the
Selectmen's
Selectmen's
hearing
hearing
room.
room.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Um,
Move to adjourn. Move to adjourn.